On a quiet May night in 1981, an 11-year-old boy awoke to find a tall, masked intruder tying him up. Minutes later, he witnessed a scene no child should ever have to face. His mother, Christine, shot to death, lying in a pool of blood and tied to her bed. The investigation quickly pointed to Lori Bambi Bembenek, a 22-year-old former police officer, as the culprit. But as the case unfolds, questions begin to arise. Was Lori really a cold-blooded killer? Or was she simply a scapegoat in a corrupt and sexist system? Lori Bembenek was born on August 15, 1958, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, growing up in a picturesque neighborhood she adored. Lori often draws inspiration from the beauty of her homeland to nurture her creativity. After finishing high school, she pursued her artistic interests by studying design and fashion at Bryant and Stratton College. Though the school was far from her family's home, her enthusiasm pushed her to relocate temporarily to Virginia. 2 years later, having earned her associate's degree, Lori returned to Milwaukee, eager to begin her career. During this time, Lori blossomed into a striking young woman. She always pays attention to her appearance, but is also very considerate of the people around her. Friends described her as kind, sensitive, and warm-hearted. For a while, she modeled for magazines and K&Rs, but her ambitions soon shifted. Lori's father, a former police officer, had left the force in frustration over widespread corruption. He had vowed never to return unless conditions improved. And in the meantime, he worked as a carpenter. Inspired by his principles and determined to show that integrity could still prevail, Lori decided to pursue a career in law enforcement herself. The police force, however, was an overwhelmingly male environment, and her father warned her of the difficulties ahead. At just 20 years old, Lori faced immense challenges. Women were rare in the department, and many male officers openly resented their presence. Even at the police academy, Lori encountered resistance. Fortunately, she wasn't alone. She befriended Judy Zess, another young woman recruit. They quickly bonded, supporting each other through the trials of training. Lori proved herself strong and athletic, often meeting or surpassing the physical standards required of men. Graduation posed no problem for her. In 1980, Lori joined the Milwaukee Police Department, but the hostility only deepened. Her male colleagues viewed her as a threat to their culture and resisted her presence at every turn. Rather than support, she received harassment and thinly veiled threats. Even minor mistakes were ridiculed, creating a toxic workplace environment. Judy also graduated and joined the force, strengthening their friendship as they faced similar struggles. They spent free time together, watching movies or attending parties, finding comfort in each other's understanding of the job's pressures. Lori met adversity with determination, while Judy sometimes turned to marijuana to cope. One day, Judy was caught smoking in Lori's presence. Though Lori did not participate, Judy was immediately arrested and dismissed from the force. Lori, too, came under suspicion, initially accused of being an accomplice. Toxicology tests cleared Lori of banned substance use, but investigators still searched for a way to implicate her. Eventually, Lori was accused of complicity simply for failing to report Judy's violation. From then on, the pressure intensified. Many in the department wanted Lori gone, scrutinizing her every move for grounds to fire her. By August 1980, she was dismissed from the force and effectively blacklisted, making it nearly impossible to find similar work. The official reason, complicity in a crime, felt to Lori like nothing more than a pretext. She believed her dismissal was rooted in prejudice and resentment, a deliberate attempt to push her out. Feeling betrayed, she saw herself as yet another casualty of the corruption and injustice her father had warned her about. That summer, The Milwaukee precinct regularly held parties where officers gathered outdoors or in public spaces to drink, often pushing well past the limits of decency. At one large picnic in the city park in 1980, alcohol flowed freely. As the revelry escalated, several officers stripped off their clothes, danced naked on tables, and indiscriminated intimacy with women. The event took place in public view, was witnessed by residents, and provocative photographs were taken. When Lori learned of the incident, she was outraged. She believed that such blatant misconduct warranted far harsher punishment than her friend Judy's private marijuana use. Her anger was understandable. She had lost her job for something beyond her control, while those engaging in public indecency faced no consequences. Determined to seek justice, Lori obtained copies of the photographs and confirmed that none of the officers involved had been disciplined, furious at the double standard within the department. She submitted the photos to the police committee and filed a lawsuit, alleging discrimination, more than justice. Lori hoped these efforts might restore her position on the force, a job she had fought hard to earn. But her case stalled, and ultimately, no one was punished. At the time, Lori and Judy were struggling financially. Both unemployed, they shared a small apartment, barely able to cover rent. They blamed the Milwaukee Police Department for their situation, their savings rapidly vanishing. Desperate for income, Lori accepted an offer to work at the Playboy Club, a private venue catering to wealthy men about an hour outside Milwaukee. Though the job meant wearing revealing outfits and serving food and drinks, she saw it as a temporary solution to pay off debts. Judy, however, was not hired. Lori quickly discovered the financial rewards. Generous tips eased her money troubles, yet she disliked the atmosphere from the start. The lewd remarks, unwanted advances, and harassment from patrons wore her down. Matters turned darker when she found a dead rat placed on the hood of her car after a shift. Rats were unheard of at the upscale club, and Lori interpreted this as a threat, an intimidation tactic linked to her complaints against the police. Rather than frightening her into silence, the incident only strengthened her resolve to fight for women's rights, particularly within law enforcement. After a month at the club, Lori could no longer tolerate the environment and resigned. She had saved enough to settle her debts and extend her lease. Seeking stability, she found work as a trainer at a fitness club. Around this time, Lori met Alfred O. Fred Schultz, a police officer 10 years her senior who worked at the same station where she and Judy had once served. Fred had even attended the infamous naked party, though Lori was unaware of this when they met. In turn, I had no knowledge of her discrimination complaint and bore her no resentment. Then, Lori and Fred fell in love. She overlooked his flaws, including a reputation as a ladies' man, choosing instead to embrace the romance. Fred had recently divorced his first wife, Christine Schultz, who left him after uncovering his repeated infidelities. He had 2 young sons from that marriage. Charming and persuasive, Fred soon proposed to Lori, and she accepted. In January 1981, just 3 months after his divorce, they married in Illinois. However, Wisconsin law required a 6-month waiting period after divorce before remarriage, so their first marriage was annulled. They later remarried legally, after which Fred moved into the small apartment Lori shared with Judy and her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Christine, Fred's ex-wife, was left raising their 2 sons in the family home. Fred now faced mounting financial and housing difficulties. He often complained to Lori and Judy about the alimony and child support payments he was obligated to send his ex-wife, which amounted to $700 a month. On the night of May 28, 1981, Christine and Fred's 11-year-old son was startled awake by strange noises in the dark. When he opened his eyes, he saw a masked intruder attempting to tie him up. The stranger wore gloves, a green tracksuit, and a ski mask, with red hair pulled back into a ponytail. Terrified, the boy screamed, startling the intruder. As the figure fled, they shouted threats. The boy immediately ran to his mother's room, only to discover Christine bound to the bed with her mouth taped shut. She had been shot in the chest. The boy called for an ambulance and the police, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. Christine, just 30 years old, had died from a gunshot wound that pierced her chest and grazed her heart, causing fatal blood loss. Her children were unharmed. Forensic investigators quickly examined the home. There were no signs of forced entry, nor was anything missing. While some families in the area occasionally left their doors unlocked, Christine's sons insisted they always locked up, leading detectives to suspect that the killer may have had a key and was familiar with the household. Fred was informed of the tragedy while on duty. A colleague picked him up and drove him to the house, where he saw Christine's body. Fred insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. Later that night, back at Lori's apartment, Fred showed his colleague his service revolver. With only a cursory glance, the colleague claimed the gun hadn't been fired recently. Seems to have cleared the doubts about Fred. But when the revolver was properly tested, ballistics confirmed it was the weapon used to kill Christine. Despite this, investigators soon turned their attention not to Fred, but to Lori Bembenek. Detectives believed Lori had a motive: resentment toward Christine, whom she blamed for Fred's costly child support payments. Lori also had potential access to Christine's home. Fred had secretly copied his eldest son's house key, which, investigators argued, could have ended up in Lori's possession. This theory suggested she could have entered the house undetected. Lori, however, denied the accusations, stating she had gone to bed early that night. But with Fred on duty and Judy asleep, no one could corroborate her alibi. Christine's 11-year-old son described the intruder as a male figure with red hair in a ponytail, dressed in a green tracksuit and black shoes. Lori was a blonde and did not own a wig. Yet just days later, a bizarre discovery shifted the case. When plumbers were called to unclog Lori's apartment drain, they found a red wig lodged in the pipes. Lori swore she had never seen it and had no idea how it got there. Police then searched her apartment and uncovered a green tracksuit, closely matching the description of the intruder's clothing. With this evidence, detectives believed they had their suspect. On June 24, 1981, less than a month after Christine's death, Lori Bembenek was arrested for murder. From the start, Lori insisted she was being framed by the Milwaukee police as revenge for her earlier discrimination complaints. Still, her inability to produce a solid alibi severely weakened her case. Her refusal to take a lie detector test further fueled suspicion. Lori explained her decision by citing her time in law enforcement, where she had seen firsthand that polygraphs were unreliable and could be manipulated, even though lie detector results weren't admissible in court. Her refusal, while logical, was not well received. At the time, Lori was working as a security officer at the Marquette University. Investigators searched her locker and seized a comb for forensic testing. The FBI later claimed that hair recovered from the crime scene was microscopically similar to strands found on Lori's comb. With this, detectives announced they had enough evidence to charge her with first-degree murder. Lori Bembenek's trial for the first-degree murder of Christine Schultz was set for February 1982. Until then, Lori remained free on bond, awaiting trial under intense public scrutiny. The case quickly became a national sensation, and the relentless press attention transformed her into a reluctant celebrity. Every detail of her life, her looks, her clothes, her past, was splashed across headlines. Reporters even saddled her with the nickname Bambi, a play on her last name, which they despised for its mocking undertone. As the trial neared, two of Lori's closest connections turned against her. Her former best friend and roommate, Judy Tsess, emerged as a key witness for the prosecution. Once inseparable, they had fallen out after their dismissal from law enforcement. On the stand, Judy claimed Lori harbored deep hatred toward Christine and had often threatened to kill her. She further alleged that Lori had purchased a red wig in the weeks leading up to the murder. Judy's testimony was riddled with inconsistencies. particularly with timelines. But the discrepancies received little weight in court. Lori's estranged husband, Fred Schultz, also dealt her a crushing blow. No longer loyal to her, and already living with another woman, Fred testified against Lori, contradicting his earlier statements about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He now claimed he had been at a bar, not off duty at home. The jury also heard about his prior accidental shooting of a fellow officer, though he had been cleared of wrongdoing. Other witnesses came forward with damning claims that Lori had repeatedly talked about killing Christine, that she had once offered someone money to carry out the crime, and that she owned a green tracksuit similar to the one worn by the intruder. A store clerk testified that Lori had purchased a wig resembling the one found in her apartment's plumbing, and forensic experts reported that wig fibers matched those at the crime scene. The prosecution's portrait of Lori was harsh, a vain, ambitious young woman who, obsessed with Fred's money and resentful of Christine, wanted her out of the picture so she could enjoy Fred's house without the burden of child support. The defense, by contrast, argued that Lori had no desire to raise Fred's children and insisted she was the victim of a frame-up. Lori herself claimed that the Milwaukee Police Department had conspired against her as retaliation for her efforts to expose corruption and misconduct within the force. She argued that Fred, who stood to benefit most by avoiding alimony, regaining his home, and gaining custody of his children, was the one with the true motive. But the jury was unmoved. On March 9, 1982, after a highly publicized trial, 22-year-old Lori Bembenek was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, she and Fred divorced. Prison life did not break Lori. She studied law, contributed artwork to the prison newspaper, and clung to the hope of overturning her conviction. Through a fellow inmate, she began corresponding with Dominic Guglielmo, the brother of another prisoner. Their relationship blossomed into romance, and Dominic became her most steadfast supporter. On July 15, 1990, after 8 years behind bars, Lauria made a daring escape. She slipped out through a laundry room window, scaled a barbed wire fence, and fled into the night, where Dominic waited with a getaway car. Together, they crossed into Canada, posing as a married couple while evading authorities. Meanwhile, troubling new evidence began to surface. A fellow prisoner, Freddie Horenberger, allegedly confessed to killing Christine at Fred Schultz's request, though he refused to testify publicly. Judy, Lori's former friend, later recanted her testimony, admitting she had been pressured by police and never truly believed Lori was guilty. Additional revelations cast further doubt on the case. Moreover, Fred had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, an arrangement not revealed during the trial. With these revelations, the theory that Lori had been framed gained traction. Her prison break only amplified the public fascination with her case. Far from being vilified, Lori gained an army of supporters. Sympathizers wore T-shirts declaring, "Run, Bambi, run," raised money for private investigators and legal fees, and formed clubs dedicated to clearing her name. For many, she came to symbolize the dangers of corruption, sexism, and injustice in the criminal justice system. At this point, problems with the initial investigation were becoming clear. The wig, a central piece of prosecution evidence, was far from conclusive. Having been retrieved from a sewer, it was likely contaminated, and the store clerk's testimony about Lori purchasing such a wig was shaky at best. Even more damaging to the case, Judy, the prosecution's star witness, had since recanted her testimony, admitting she had been pressured by police and had personal conflicts with Lori before the murder. Without Judy's account, much of the state's case against Lori unraveled. Authorities had also leaned heavily on the testimony of Sean, Christine's eldest son, who claimed he saw the intruder. But Sean described the perpetrator as a man, taller and more heavily built than Lori, with a low, growling male voice. Years later, as an adult, Sean repeated in interviews that there was no way he could have mistaken the figure he saw for a woman. Nevertheless, investigators brushed aside this detail. After escaping from prison, Lori and Dominic crossed the Canadian border, eventually reaching Thunder Bay, Ontario. Life on the run was far harsher than they had imagined. With no money, their relationship quickly frayed. Lori struggled to survive, finding work as a waitress under the alias Jennifer Gazana and dyeing her hair to avoid recognition. When that wasn't enough, she picked up a second job as a fitness instructor. Dominic, however, grew despondent. He refused to work, spent their limited funds on hunting and fishing gear, passed his days outdoors with new acquaintances. Lori's efforts to hold their new life together came crashing down when a television program aired a segment on America's Most Wanted Fugitives. A restaurant customer recognized her and tipped off authorities. On October 17, 1990, Canadian police arrested Dominic and Lori. Dominic was extradited to the United States, where he served 3.5 months for aiding the escape, before abandoning Lori altogether. Lori, meanwhile, fought desperately to remain in Canada. She portrayed herself as a political refugee, a woman persecuted and wrongfully imprisoned, and even passed a polygraph test to support her claim of innocence. But United States authorities pressed for her return, and eventually Canadian officials agreed, on the condition that she receive a new trial. This sparked a reinvestigation that revealed numerous flaws in the original Milwaukee police inquiry. Evidence handling had been sloppy, investigative leads were ignored, and much of the state's case rested on circumstantial claims. Still, Lori's defense team feared that a full acquittal was unlikely. The prosecution, too, faced difficulties, with little credible evidence left to rely on. On December 9, 1992, Lauria struck a deal. In an unusual arrangement, she entered a plea of no contest, securing a reduced sentence of 20 years with parole eligibility. Because of the time she had already served, she was released directly from the courtroom. For the next decade, she lived under strict parole conditions, checking in regularly with authorities to avoid being sent back to prison. Freedom, however, came at a heavy price. Years of incarceration had left deep scars. Lori, once strikingly beautiful, had visibly aged, struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, and turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism, which spiraled into dependency. She spoke openly about end-her-own-life thoughts as she battled emotional turmoil and crippling debt. Over $2 million in legal expenses forced her into bankruptcy. Her story, however, continued to captivate the public. Lori appeared on talk shows, became the subject of multiple books, and even published her own autobiography, Woman on the Run. She tried to capitalize on her notoriety by selling her artwork and briefly opened a gallery, but disaster struck again when a fire destroyed nearly all her paintings. Lori suspected the blaze was the work of vengeful police officers. Struggling to rebuild, she found herself virtually unemployable due to her fame and notoriety. Eventually, she left Milwaukee behind, relocating to Vancouver to live with her parents and escape the constant reminder of her turbulent past. In August 2002, Lori Bembenek's probation period finally ended. Soon after, she petitioned the court to allow DNA testing on the evidence used against her. Items like Christine Schultz's blood-stained bedding, the bullet removed from her body, clothing, and the red wig fibers. But the tests would cost tens of thousands of dollars, far beyond Lori's reach. Then, in November 2002, Lori received an unusual offer. A television program, Dr. Phil, dedicated to investigating cold cases, invited her to appear on their show, and even offered to cover the $20,000 cost of advanced DNA testing. The producers insisted on re-examining the bullet and made it clear all results would be compared with Lori's own DNA profile. At the time, she was 44 years old. During filming, Lori was housed in a private apartment and given security because of the media frenzy surrounding her case. But instead of feeling free, she felt trapped once again. Overwhelmed by anxiety, she suffered a panic attack and, in desperation, jumped out of a window. The fall left her with devastating injuries, leading to the amputation of her leg below the knee. The show was abruptly canceled. Lori later sued the program, claiming she had been wrongfully confined. But the court rejected her lawsuit. She also attempted to reopen her case, hoping to prove her innocence. But since she had previously agreed not to challenge the conviction, her petitions were denied. Her lawyers still fought for her, arguing that key evidence had been suppressed during the original trial. A ballistics test suggested the fatal bullet did not match Lori Bembenek's gun. Male DNA was also found on Christine's body, pointing to abuse assault. Even Christine's eldest son continued to insist Lori was not the killer. He claimed to have seen a man at the crime scene. Despite all of this, the appeals went nowhere. Life eventually brought Lori to Vancouver, where she met Marty Carson, a Forest Service worker. They married in 2005, but her years of struggle took a toll. In 2010, Lori was diagnosed with hepatitis, and on November 20, at just 52 years old, she died of liver and kidney failure. Until her final breath, Lori maintained her innocence. On a March morning in a tranquil Michigan neighborhood, two men were engaged in a tense conversation inside a small mobile home. The situation seemed stable, but suddenly, things took a turn for the worse. Scott Amador was born on January 26, 1963, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the second largest city in the state. He grew up in a working-class family. His father, Frank Amador, worked as a truck driver, and his mother, Patricia Graves, was a homemaker. In 1968, when Scott was a baby, the family moved to Michigan. This move was followed by a difficult period. His parents divorced, and the children were separated. Scott and three of his brothers lived with their father, while the other siblings lived with their mother. This separation had a lasting impact on the family. As Scott entered his teens, he became very charismatic. He was friendly, kind, giving, and understanding, and he easily made friends. At 17, wanting more structure in his life, he left school and joined the Air Force. During this time, Scott told his family that he was attracted to men. His brother said that his family responded with love and acceptance, not disapproval. Scott served in the military for 3 to 4 years and was honorably discharged as a specialist. After leaving the service, Scott went back to Michigan and started working in telecommunications. However, he found the work dull and missed excitement. He then switched to bartending at a well-known gay club in the city, which was a better fit for his outgoing personality. He enjoyed the vibrant nightlife and became successful because he was enthusiastic and generous. He made many friends and earned respect in his community. However, what is less known is that Scott has been quietly battling banned, substance addiction, and emotional difficulties. He confronted these problems head-on by attending rehab several times. His friends recall him as funny, caring, and always willing to help. In particular, at a time when people harshly judged those with disease of the century, Scott invited them to live with him. This willingness to embrace new things eventually led to a special opportunity for him. Scott, a big fan of talk shows, saw an ad for The Jenny Jones Show. They were looking for people to reveal their secret same-sex crushes on television. Scott was excited by this opportunity to be on television and to share a secret of his own. He had a crush on his 24-year-old friend and neighbor, Jonathan Schmitz. Jonathan had even flirted with him a few times. Scott thought the show would be the ideal way to tell Jonathan how he felt. Jonathan, born the 18th of July, 1970, in Michigan, had a reputation among acquaintances as polite and charming. Yet, beneath that exterior lay a fragile, emotional state. He had a history of depression, substance abuse, and physical health issues compounded by a turbulent family background. Scott applied to be on the show and was invited to Chicago for taping after talking to the producers. He was thrilled and asked his friend Donna Riley to go with him. At the same time, the Jenny Jones Show contacted Jonathan, but they weren't entirely honest. They led him to believe that his secret admirer was a woman. Jonathan, who had recently ended a long relationship, thought it might be a former girlfriend or a new unknown admirer. On March 6, 1995, 32-year-old Scott went to the studio to record an episode called Secret Crushes. He didn't realize this day would be life-altering. During the taping, in front of a live audience, Scott confessed his attraction to Jonathan. He shared lighthearted fantasies, picturing them relaxing in a hammock at his house, enjoying champagne and whipped cream. Jonathan was backstage, not knowing who was talking or what they were saying. He then walked onto the stage and heard the announcement. Looking surprised, the audience laughed, but Jonathan seemed uncomfortable. He blushed, hid his face, and awkwardly told the cameras he was straight. 3 days after the taping of the Jenny Jones Show, on the morning of the 9th of March, 1995, events took a deadly turn. That day, Jonathan discovered a handwritten note left at the door of his home. The message is suggestive and is believed to be signed by Scott. Shortly after reading it, Jonathan drove to a bank and withdrew cash before heading to a local gun store where he purchased a 12-gauge shotgun and a box of ammunition. Jonathan, armed and with a plan, drove to Scott's mobile home. Case records show that Jonathan confronted Scott about the note. Reports indicate Scott admitted to writing it. Jonathan said he had to return to his car because it was still running, but instead, he went to get a shotgun. He came back into the house, raised the shotgun, and shot Scott twice in the chest. Scott died instantly from these fatal wounds. Inside the residence at the time was Gail Clinton, one of Scott's housemates, who, horrified by what he had just witnessed, quickly dialed 911 to report the shooting and request help. Surprisingly, Jonathan also called the police himself, his voice shaking with emotion as he admitted to the killing. News of the incident spread rapidly, dominating headlines and television broadcasts. The combination of a sensational talk show segment and a sudden act of lethal violence made it a national story almost overnight. Police arrived at the crime scene within minutes. Scott's body lay lifeless, and officers wasted no time in taking Jonathan into custody. As the investigation started, the public wasn't just angry at the murderer. Many criticized the Jenny Jones Show, claiming its producers contributed to the events that led to Scott's death. Under increasing pressure, the show released an official statement 6 days later. On March 15, 1995, at the beginning of that day's episode, Jenny Jones spoke directly to the audience. She expressed sorrow over the tragedy, but maintained that Scott's death was caused by the killer alone, not by the show. She also stated that Jonathan knew in advance that his secret admirer might be male or female, a claim Jonathan later disputed. Despite the statement, the debate over the show's responsibility intensified. The murder had not only claimed a life but had also sparked a national conversation about the ethics of televised entertainment, the manipulation of guests, and the consequences of turning private matters into public spectacle. After Scott Amador died, both families shared their thoughts. Jonathan's father blamed the Jenny Jones Show, arguing it caused the events leading to his son's actions. Jonathan's grandfather even said Jenny Jones triggered the crime. The police investigation moved quickly. Jonathan had already confessed, and investigators had strong physical evidence from the crime scene, along with corroborating witness statements from neighbors and acquaintances. Yet, a detail later emerged from a close friend of Scott's, great Enmore. He claimed that after the taping, there had been a night out during which Scott and Jonathan might have had an intimate encounter. Jonathan, however, always denied this. maintaining that he had been left humiliated and deeply unsettled by the public revelation on the show. He insisted that the producers had led him to believe his admirer was a woman, which only intensified his feelings of betrayal when the truth was revealed on camera. As media coverage grew, the case evolved into more than just a murder trial. It became a flashpoint for discussions about homophobia, public humiliation, and the ethics of sensationalist television. The legal proceedings began on the 14th of October, 1996. Prosecutors initially charged Jonathan with first-degree premeditated murder and felony firearm offenses. The defense countered with a mental health argument, stating that Jonathan suffered from manic depression, now known as bipolar disorder, as well as Graves' disease, a thyroid condition known to cause symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, heart palpitations, and excessive sweating. They also invoked what was then called the gay panic defense, claiming that Jonathan's violent reaction stemmed from an overwhelming sense of public humiliation and emotional shock that he was unable to control. This strategy drew fierce criticism from LGBTQ rights advocates who viewed it as an unacceptable attempt to justify violence based on gender orientation. During the trial, jurors were repeatedly shown footage from the Jenny Jones episode. After weeks of testimony and arguments, they returned a verdict on the 13th of November, 1996. Jonathan Schmitz was found guilty of second-degree murder. He sentenced to a term of no less than 25 and no more than 50 years in state prison. The case might have ended there, but in March 1995, the Amager family filed a civil lawsuit against the Jenny Jones show, Warner Brothers, and other associated parties. The lawsuit became a high-profile legal battle, raising unprecedented questions about television's responsibility for the psychological well-being of its participants. The family argued that the show had deliberately engineered a dangerous, emotionally volatile situation for the sake of ratings. The suit alleged wrongful death, claiming producers had knowingly exposed Jonathan to a potentially humiliating and psychologically damaging scenario without his informed consent. Their legal team presented evidence that producers had misled Jonathan into thinking the revelation would involve a heterosexual romantic interest while ignoring warning signs of emotional instability in both him and Scott. Testimony during the trial also shed light on the program's behind-the-scenes tactics. Accounts that portrayed a production culture willing to push emotional boundaries for entertainment value, regardless of potential harm. In May 1990, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously sided with the Amager family. They found both the show and the network liable, awarding $29 million in damages. The verdict was widely covered in the press and ignited a nationwide debate about the ethical limits of entertainment television and its role in causing psychological or physical harm. However, the outcome would not stand. The show's and network's attorneys appealed, arguing that the producers could not have foreseen such an extreme criminal act and that responsibility rested solely with Jonathan. In September 2002, the Michigan Court of Appeals overturned the jury's decision, clearing the show and Warner Brothers of any legal obligation to pay damages. The appellate ruling that overturned the civil judgment rested on the argument that freedom of expression and press protections allowed for certain types of content, even if that content was socially controversial or potentially harmful. As a result, the Amager family never received the nearly $30 million in damages originally awarded by the first jury verdict. Still, the case left an impact on the Jenny Jones show. In the wake of the controversy, the production implemented a counseling protocol for guests both before and after episodes were taped. However, the damage to its reputation was irreversible. Ratings steadily declined, and within a year, the once popular talk show was canceled and removed from the air entirely. As for the episode involving Scott and Jonathan, it was never officially broadcast. Though portions of the footage appeared in news reports and court coverage, Jonathan faced further legal challenges after his initial conviction. His lawyers appealed, citing errors in the trial process. They argued that the intense media attention, manipulation by producers, and Jonathan's mental health problems weren't properly taken into account. This appeal resulted in a new trial. On September 14, 1999, Jonathan Schmitz was again found guilty of second-degree murder, and his original sentence of 25 to 50 years in prison was reimposed. He served almost 22 years before being paroled on August 22, 2017, at age 47. Due to good behavior, after his release, Jonathan lived a private life, avoiding publicity and declining to discuss the infamous case. In May 2020, the story was re-examined in the premiere episode of the Netflix docuseries Trial by Media. The program criticized what it saw as a profound lack of ethical responsibility in certain daytime talk shows of the 1,992nd shows that knowingly exposed private lives to public scrutiny for the sake of higher ratings. To this day, the Scott Amajur case stands as a cautionary tale, resonating in ongoing conversations about media accountability, the limits of free speech, and the profound human cost of transforming personal tragedies into public spectacles. Love is a wonderful feeling that inspires books, music, and films. However, if it's a perverted love, held by a sick individual, it can be devastating, shattering many lives. Similarly, wealth can easily corrupt, causing a person to lose self-control. When feelings are added to this volatile mix, the outcome is rarely positive. Dion Andrea Bao, an immigrant from Jamaica, possessed a striking beauty. She planned to attend college in Atlanta, USA, focusing on finance. She moved to America with her husband, also a Jamaican native, named Sean Nelson, a Jamaica Airlines pilot. They met in Miami nightclub in 1988. Dion was always drawn to wealth. In the 1,982nd and 92nd, being a pilot was a prestigious position. They earned a good income and could afford a comfortable lifestyle. However, Sean's job had its downsides. He spent little time at home. 2 years into the relationship, they decided to move to Georgia. Sean was content with his job and life. Dion worked as a secretary at a large company while continuing her education and becoming other. Despite Sean's prestigious and well-paid job, disagreements began to surface. Dion felt he lacked ambition and had no prospects for advancement, which frustrated her. Dion believed he should continue to develop professionally. She pushed him to change careers and go into business, suggesting that her financial education could help them create a family company. She also hoped this would keep him home more. He resisted, so Dion decided to take matters into her own hands. Then, Sean's frequent absences now worked to her advantage. Instead of devoting her free time to her baby, Dion began searching for a man who could offer her a better lifestyle. In April 1996, Dion, working as a secretary, had access to the office mail. One day, she saw an invitation to an exclusive party for wealthy individuals. She recognized this as a chance to meet wealthy and influential people, hoping it would help her achieve her desire for wealth and luxury. Dion asked her boss about the invitation. He explained it was a birthday party for Lance Herndon, a tech mogul. Naturally, Dion was very interested in attending. Initially, her boss was hesitant because she didn't know anyone there. However, impressed by her ambition and confidence, he thought her presence would be well received. Dion's manager learned that another employee had also received an invitation, but didn't plan to go. He convinced that employee to pass the invitation to Dion. She had gotten her way and could now attend a privileged party for the upper crust of society. By this point, she had little interest in her husband and child, wanting only to gain access to U.S. high society and become rich and famous. Lance Herndon's 41st birthday was a golden opportunity for the young woman. He was a well-known Atlanta multimillionaire who made his fortune in the technology business. He owned a company called Access, Inc., focused on integrating high technology into the city's 911 emergency service program. He aimed to expand it. With a deep understanding of computers and advanced solutions, during his career, Lance was recognized as one of the 500 best entrepreneurs in the United States. He even met with President Bill Clinton, who praised his work. Lance was a hard worker, a trait instilled in him by his paternal grandfather, who taught him to wake up early and work efficiently. He had 3 alarm clocks in his bedroom, set for 3:40 a.m., 3:50 a.m., and 4 o'clock a.m. Upon waking, he immediately began his workday, delegating tasks to his employees. His house was in the same building as his company's offices. He lived on the first floor, which had a separate entrance, while the rest of the employees worked on the upper floors. Waking up at 4 o'clock a.m., Lance would go to his office upstairs and write messages for the employees who would arrive later. He provided them with instructions, laying them out at their workstations so they knew what to do upon arrival. People willingly worked at his company for many years and were well compensated. Everyone saw in Lance a reasonable and sensitive leader, focused on success. Thanks to his meticulousness and love for his business, he achieved everything one could only dream of. The company flourished in the 90s, and Atlanta became a hub of social life, with Lance becoming a prominent figure, working from Monday to Friday. He didn't forget about rest. On weekends, he often threw private parties. In addition to success and fame, he had weaknesses. His main vice was beautiful women. However, he wasn't conventionally attractive. A short man with a simple appearance, he didn't attract many women in his youth. But when he became wealthy, many women pursued him. By this point, he had been married 3 times. Shortly before the party Dion wanted to attend, he got divorced again. To those close to him, the reason for this breakup was no secret: his infidelity. Women loved him. He was famous, rich, and generous with gifts. He spent thousands of dollars on his mistresses every week, even more than he gave to his wife. She grew tired of enduring his infidelity. So, when the position of Lance Herndon's wife became vacant once again in 1996, the competition was fierce. However, being the next Mrs. Herndon wasn't so pleasant. In fact, 2 of Lance's wives couldn't even stay in the relationship until their first anniversary. Lance quickly lost interest in his lovers, after which he usually offered them money and ended the relationship. Back to 1990. Janine Price became Lance's next wife. Many in the man's circle believed she was the most worthy partner for him. Immediately after their marriage, they began working on their dream home, a 6,000 square meter mansion. Most of their neighbors were wealthy individuals, and construction was underway in a prestigious area in the Roswell suburb of Atlanta. During the same period, the first disagreements appeared. Janine didn't like her husband's approach to business. Even the fact that he left notes for his employees early in the morning, and then went off to do his own thing and practically didn't contact anyone. She considered it selfish. Lance himself was sure that direct communication with ordinary workers was a waste of time. Law of repetition. Lance lost interest in Janine pretty quickly. By this time, Janine was already pregnant with their future son. She noticed that Lance's interest faded. He practically stopped communicating with her, and soon she found out that he was dating and even sleeping with others. For some time, she endured all this, hoping to save the family, expecting that her husband would show interest in her again. But by the time their child was born, she could no longer stand his behavior. Janine decided to break up because of numerous betrayals. So, by his 41st birthday, Lance Herndon was again on the market. Having received an invitation to a party, Dion began to prepare carefully. In April 1996, she found herself at a private party organized by multimillionaire Lance Herndon. She chose the best outfit, did stunning makeup, and styled her hair. There were more than 400 people gathered there, all of them representatives of the privileged community of Atlanta. Despite the fact that Dion didn't know anyone there, she looked so amazing. However, she wasn't interested in these people. She wanted the main attraction, Lance. At this time, Lance didn't communicate much with the guests who came. He usually took a place in the corner of the rented room with a large table and a sofa, sat, and talked with women. He had a habit of keeping a piece of paper on which each woman could write her name and phone number. This piece of paper was never empty. At some point during the evening, Lance found himself drawn to a petite woman with captivating brown eyes, who seemed to be watching him. It was Dion. Despite not being invited, and knowing no one else at the party, she somehow managed to capture the attention of the host himself. In the midst of the celebration, Lance approached her, introduced himself as Lance Herndon, and struck up a conversation. They spent the rest of the evening together, chatting amiably. He obtained Dion's phone number, and from the very next day, their relationship began to blossom. Lance frequently told his inner circle that he had finally met the most stunning woman in Atlanta. This wasn't entirely new behavior. He typically showered his new lovers with both compliments and extravagant gifts. Within a couple of weeks, a brand new luxury Mercedes appeared in Dion's driveway. She had completely charmed him. He seemed to have lost his head. She willingly accepted any amount of money he offered, to the point where he even gave her his credit card. During this period, Dion was still married. However, her husband and son quickly became secondary in her life. Shaun, returning from yet another flight, was understandably surprised to see his wife driving such an expensive car. When he inquired about it, Dion explained that she had a new business coach who was mentoring her. Dion laughed at his old used car and occasionally allowed he to drive her new car. Although Dion was not yet ready to leave her husband, she certainly couldn't give up her newfound luxurious lifestyle, especially since her husband, being a pilot, I was away for weeks at a time, leaving her with ample opportunity to spend time with Lance. Her husband found her excuse somewhat convincing. The car did not arouse much suspicion, but returning from another flight, he found out that his wife had moved to a new big house. In response to his questions, she said that she had been saving money for a long time. Of course, it was a lie. Shaun suspected deception and demanded proof of her alleged savings. But Dion simply avoided the question. Now, he really doubted this, so he decided to take his child back to his family in Jamaica. Little did he know that this was exactly what Dion wanted. She could now freely devote all of her time to Lance, hoping to become the next Mrs. Herndon. It remains unclear whether she ever told Lance about her husband and child. Regardless, he willingly entered into a serious relationship with her. Soon, he had a pretty secretary with a Jamaican accent who would rush to his office at a moment's notice in a gifted car. However, Dion wasn't the only one engaged in deception. Lance, too, was a deceiver. His accountant was his own mother, a fact that was far from coincidental. He needed someone he could trust implicitly to keep the true state of his company a secret. The harsh reality was that his accounts were nearly empty. He was broke due to his exorbitant spending on parties and women. His credit cards were tens of thousands of dollars in debt, but he couldn't bring himself to stop and adopt a more modest lifestyle. Lance's mother was fully aware of the situation but kept it a secret. Her primary concern was to ensure that taxes were paid and that the staff received their salaries on time, so that no one would suspect a thing. Approximately 2 months into his relationship with Dion, Lance's total debts reached almost $500,000. The lovers' relationship had developed rapidly, but then things began to follow his usual pattern. Sometime after they met, Lance began to lose interest. During this period, he spent between $20,000 and $40,000 each month on his mistress. She quickly became addicted to the wealthy life, filling her wardrobe exclusively with designer clothes and even refusing to wear the same outfits twice. Lance did not want to tell her the truth. According to his standard scenario, he gradually began to limit communication, assuming that everything would soon come to naught. Dion, however, proved to be far more persistent than the American women Lance was accustomed to dealing with. Despite his persistent ignoring of her calls, Dion began seeking out opportunities to meet him. Now, instead of money, He offered her only excuses. This was easy for him, as he had a cheat sheet with a list of the most beautiful women in Atlanta. For Dion, all this was a big blow. Now Dion's replacement is Kathy Collins, whom Lance met in Los Angeles in 1989. They kept in touch regularly over the years, but Kathy doesn't seem particularly attractive, at least not enough to be his fourth wife. Nevertheless, her photo took up space on his nightstand. During this same period, he was also communicating with Talana Caraway, an employee of his company, whom he paid personally for small administrative tasks. Not realizing the true scale of what was happening, Dion continued her desperate attempts to establish contact. But she was already considered written off like all the other young women. She kept calling and became increasingly aggressive. It became obvious that she wouldn't take no for an answer. Now, Lance described her to his friends as a real hysteric who behaved inappropriately, but Dion could no longer back down. She had received so much money from him that she was overcome with greed and couldn't stop. On July 10, 1996, she put on her best outfit and perfect makeup, ensured that Lance wouldn't be able to refuse her and that she would receive a lot of money again. Late in the evening, she went to his house, but before she reached the door, she noticed another woman inside. The plan suddenly failed. Furious, she ran to the door and began banging on it, screaming hysterically. Instead of going out to her, Lance claimed he didn't know who she was and called the police. When the patrol cars arrived, Dion was still hysterical. She was even more enraged that Lance was acting as if he didn't know her at all. She claimed that she had been dating him for months and that he paid all her bills. But because of her behavior, no one listened to her. Lance was also furious. He blocked the credit card he had given to Dion, and a statement was made about an attempted break-in, meaning Dion could end up behind bars. Naturally, this made her even angrier. In August, the situation began to escalate. A trial was coming, which could send Dion to prison, something she couldn't allow. Lance completely cut off her financial support. Finally, Dion was on the verge of divorce from her husband. Lance continued his exorbitant spending and met a new girl, spending time with her. On August 8, 1996, he attended a celebration dedicated to the Olympic Games, then picked up his 92-year-old grandmother from the airport. His ex-wife Janine decided to help with his grandmother. Then, he met Talana Caraway. They had already had several dates, and Lance wanted to get to know her better. Talana left the office at 10:37 p.m., and when she came home at 11 o'clock p.m., she received a message from Lance. Talana called him. They laughed together, chatted for a few minutes, and both went to bed. The next morning, the 9th of August, at around 8 o'clock a.m., the company employees arrived for work. However, this day was unlike any other. The usual instructions Lance, their manager, left were missing. This was very strange and uncharacteristic of him, leaving everyone confused and unsure of what to do. The residential area of the building was off-limits to regular employees, so they had to wait for Lance's mother to arrive. She went down to the residential section and screamed. She ran back out and frantically called emergency services, explaining that she had found her son in bed, covered in blood. The operator tried to obtain more details, but the woman was too distraught to speak clearly. The bloody scene had shocked her deeply. When paramedics and law enforcement officers arrived, they confirmed that 41-year-old Lance Herndon was dead. He was lying on his back, with his arms crossed over his chest. An examination revealed he had suffered at least a dozen blows to the face with a blunt object. There were no signs of forced entry. All 3 alarm clocks Lance used were turned off. His wallet and several credit cards were left on the dresser in the bedroom. But the shirt and pants he had worn the night before were missing. In the master bathroom, a bloody pillowcase, likely used to wipe the murder weapon, was found in the toilet. His laptop and an expensive ring were missing near the garage. A chewing gum wrapper was also found. Lance's mother noticed a crucial detail: a photo of Kathy, his longtime girlfriend, which he usually kept on his nightstand, was turned face down. The medical examiner determined the murder took place between 2:00 a.m. and 4:00 a.m., and that an adjustable wrench, recently used by Lance, had been used as the murder weapon and was now missing. The tool had been lying in a visible place, easily accessible. Considering Lance's promiscuous lifestyle, the murder appeared to be a crime of passion. The police immediately began questioning relatives, searching for anyone who had recently behaved aggressively towards Lance or seemed to be stalking him. One of the prime suspects was Janine, his ex-wife. She had a $1 million life insurance policy on Lance and was the sole beneficiary. However, she appeared to have no strong financial motive. Despite the substantial payout, Lance had continued to financially support her and their son, paying thousands of dollars monthly until their son turned 18. This amount would exceed the lump sum of $1 million, so he was more valuable alive. Furthermore, Janine willingly cooperated with law enforcement and did not arouse suspicion. Kathy was with another man that night. Her alibi was confirmed, as was Talana's. Investigators continued to pursue other leads. There were plenty of them. A public funeral was held. Lance was buried in a closed casket because his face was too disfigured to be restored. Then, the most shocking information came to light. There was no money in the company's account. It turned out that Lance and his mother had been struggling for years to stay afloat. They immediately spent any income to pay off debts and employee salaries, concealing their financial struggles. After Lance's death, his relatives faced an almost unbearable debt burden of around $1 million. To pay off at least some of the debt, including unpaid salaries and taxes, they began selling off property, mostly below market value. This allowed them to significantly reduce the debt. Meanwhile, detectives continued their search for the killer. 18 months passed without any leads, and the investigation stalled. The situation changed when Sean Nelson arrived at the police station. He was in the process of divorcing Dion, and after a recent argument with his wife, he contacted the police. During that argument, Dion allegedly threatened him, saying in a fit of anger that she would kill him just as she had done with Lance Herndon. Sean further claimed that Dion admitted to being in Lance Herndon's house on the night of the murder. At the time, divorce proceedings were already underway. When the name of Lance surfaced in court, Dion lied, stating they were just friends. However, investigators found her current testimony contradicted her initial testimony immediately following Lance's death. Furthermore, Dion will have a trial for attempting to break into Lance's house. Investigators began to wonder if Dion had killed Lance to prevent him from testifying against her. The police wanted to talk to Dion and went to her house. When no one answered the door, they asked her neighbors if they knew where she was. But they didn't. The investigators left the scene and returned to the station. Shortly after the police departed, Dion returned to the neighbor's house and inquired about the police visit. Dion claimed she was taking a shower when the police arrived. But the neighbor was skeptical. Observing that Dion's hair was dry and she was wearing makeup, Dion then got into her car and drove away. The neighbor contacted the police and reported Dion's departure. Police officers then returned to Dion's house to wait for her return. About 20 minutes later, Dion arrived home. She then became hysterical upon learning of Lance's death. However, the police found her reaction unconvincing. She was invited to the station for questioning, where she mentioned that Lance's laptop was with her. She explained that Lance himself had brought it to her home shortly before the murder. This claim contradicted the established timeline of events. Moreover, Lance's employees stated that he would never have taken his laptop out of the office, as he constantly needed it for work, and certainly not without its case, which was later found in Dion's storage room. On January 29, 1998, police arrested Dion Baugh and charged her with the murder of Lance Herndon. Released on $150,000 bail, prosecutors spent time building their case against her. Among the evidence presented when the case finally went to trial in 2001 was the fact that on the day Lance Herndon was found dead, Dion had purchased $3,000 worth of furniture with one of Lance's credit cards. She also had his expensive laptop, which his associates said he never left with him. Among the state's witnesses was Detective William E. Anastasio, who recalled what others had said about Dion, painting a picture of her as a promiscuous gold digger, a claim her defense team vehemently disputed. After 6 hours and 20 minutes of deliberation, a jury convicted Dion Baugh of first-degree murder for the murder of Lance Herndon and sentenced her to life in prison. However, 2 years later, the Georgia Supreme Court overturned the conviction, finding that Detective Anastasio's testimony had prejudiced the jury. Dion Baugh's second trial for the murder of Lance Herndon ended in a mistrial after the jury failed to reach a consensus. She was released on $500,000 bail, rather than risk a third trial, which could have resulted in a reinstatement of her life sentence. Dion pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in November 2004. She agreed to serve 10 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation upon her release. Dion Baugh was released from prison in November 2011 at the age of 44. Her ex-husband and children still live in Jamaica. On the morning of November 6, 2012, people on their way to work found the body of a young woman on 18th Avenue in Quezon City. She was wearing a white top and blue leggings. She had no shoes or purse or identification with her. Her eyes were open in a fearful expression. Then, police officers arrived and secured the scene, and a medical examiner was called. It was clear that she had been murdered. She had been shot 5 times in the head and had bruises, scrapes, dark marks on her body, indicating severe trauma. Injuries to her pelvic area suggested she may have been abused. She had no personal belongings except for a McDonald's paper bag in her hand. Detectives also found a McDonald's receipt nearby. While law enforcement tried to identify the victim, neighbors began giving their accounts. Some reported hearing gunshots around 5 a.m. Others saw a dark SUV speeding away. One witness said someone in the SUV shot at a person already on the ground. 2 other witnesses recalled part of the SUV's license plate number, which became a key detail early in the investigation. Crime scene technicians delayed moving the body to protect evidence. Within hours, the area was crowded with police, onlookers, journalists, and people recording videos. On the 5th of November, Julie Ann Rodales, a 20-year-old model, left her family's home in Las Piñas. It wasn't immediately cause for concern because Julie often worked late or spent time with friends. That evening, she told her mother and younger brothers not to wait up for her. Julie was going to meet a close friend, Althea Altamirano, to try and repair their relationship after a recent argument. Althea had invited Julie to meet a potential modeling client, which Julie saw as a good opportunity. Julie dressed carefully in a white top and blue leggings, and put on makeup. Around 6 p.m., she left to meet Althea at the SM Mall of Asia in Pasay. It started as a normal evening. 2 friends watched a movie, chatted, and strolled around. Later, they took a taxi to the World Trade Center, where they were to meet a client there. Around 10:30 p.m., as they walked on Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard, a dark SUV stopped next to them. 2 men jumped out, seized Julie, and shoved her into the SUV very quickly. Althea, who was right beside Julie, was unable to stop them. Julie's purse and shoes were left on the sidewalk as the SUV sped away. Althea was panicked and stayed where she was, clutching Julie's things and sobbing. Police officers saw her distress and stopped to help. They took her to the police station. There, she gave a confused account, saying that Julie had been kidnapped by strangers she didn't recognize. She said the attack was sudden. She barely saw the vehicle, only that it was a big, black SUV. She emphasized that they hadn't tried to take her too. At around 12:40 a.m., after giving her statement, Althea texted her boyfriend asking him to come pick her up. He arrived with his father, and they took her home to Cavite. By the following day, she had stopped answering calls from law enforcement. Later, her relatives claimed that she was afraid for her safety. However, detectives noted several inconsistencies in Althea's story. She failed to mention the prearranged meeting with Julie or the purported professional introduction they were to have. Julie Ann Rodelis was born on July 14, 1992, and raised in Las Piñas, a southern suburb of Metro Manila. Within a modest but close-knit household, she was one of 6 siblings. Her mother, Luz, supported the family by preparing and selling homemade meals. A father figure was absent from their lives. His whereabouts and identity remained unknown, and he played no role in their daily existence. Despite the financial hardships, Julie grew up surrounded by love and support. From a young age, she was focused and responsible. Her decision to study hotel and restaurant management at Arellano University, a private college, was deliberate and driven by her long-term goals. However, the high tuition costs forced her to put her education on hold several times. To help fund her studies, Julie began working part-time. Modeling wasn't a pursuit of fame for her. It was a practical solution to cover her expenses. Her entry into the industry came through a personal connection, which eventually led to commercial shoots and an appearance on the ABS-CBN network. Julie's modeling career began to gain traction. She was featured in photo shoots for well-known men's magazines, including FHM Philippines. Her appearance, work ethic, and professionalism helped her secure steady gigs. She carved a path forward in a highly competitive field, while balancing her studies and modeling career. A significant influence in Julie's modeling career was Althea Altamirano, a friend, 3 years her senior. Althea had also entered the modeling world and, by 2012, had gained a modest level of recognition. She was featured as a Girlfriend of the Month in the September issue of FHM that year. In her social circles, Althea was viewed as ambitious, energetic, and goal-oriented. However, behind the image of success were personal details she kept carefully hidden. She was a mother of 2. She chose not to publicize this, knowing it could undermine her image as a young and unattached professional model. They had known each other for years, and their relationship appeared close from the outside. Julie trusted her deeply. However, things shifted as Julie began gaining more traction in the industry. As her popularity grew, so did the tension between them. In Althea's eyes, Julie had gone from a friend to a rival. At the same time, rumors began spreading among other models that Althea was raising 2 children. Althea suspected that Julie was the one who had shared that information, and she saw it as a betrayal. That moment marked a turning point in their relationship. What started as quiet jealousy gradually turned into resentment and, eventually, into conflict. Though the tension remained unspoken, it hung heavily between them. Althea's growing fear of losing her standing in the industry pushed her toward confiding in her boyfriend. Fernando Quiambao Jr. was 32 years old and owned a tattoo shop in Quezon City. He was known for his aggressive behavior. According to Althea, during one of their arguments, he once pointed a weapon at her. Although she felt threatened, she didn't leave the relationship. It was Fernando who came up with the idea to scare Julie, suggesting it would help her understand who she was dealing with. The plan was to stage a confrontation without letting things go too far. Althea didn't push back on the suggestion. She didn't have a concrete plan, nor did she seem to grasp how serious the situation could become. Althea chose the moment, shared Julie's location, led her to the designated spot, and stood by silently when the incident occurred. None of these actions were impulsive. Right after Julie was kidnapped, she was taken to a house on Leno Street in Salam Compound, Quezon City. Compound is a crowded residential area with mostly Muslim families. The house was being used as a temporary hiding place. Inside, several men associated with Fernando were openly present. The kidnapping was planned in advance, and each person had a specific job, according to court records. The first person to isolate Julie was a man named Efren Talib. He took her into a separate room. Soon after, others in the house heard her yelling and pleading for help. One of the men present, Waraji, later testified that he heard her cries, but chose not to intervene. That's when the aggression escalated physically. Witnesses stated that Efren was the initial aggressor and remained alone with her for an extended period. Evidence later confirmed that she was subjected to both physical assault and an act of aggressive harassment. Later that night, a man named Aldos, described by others as dangerous and unpredictable, arrived at the house. He was not part of the original plan, and his presence was unwanted. Jamer, Aldos, and others were already there. Aldos, armed with a .45 caliber handgun, quickly took control. He ignored objections and announced he would assault Julie before she was taken care of. No one present intervened. Aldos's arrival dramatically escalated the situation. Unlike the others, he didn't treat it as a scare tactic or staged intimidation. His actions made it clear that he never intended to let Julie leave the house alive. Aldos told Julie she was going home as she exited the house. Julie, relieved and optimistic, thanked him, not knowing he was lying. Meanwhile, the others were planning how to get rid of her body. Yamar, realizing the situation was worse than he expected, left. He later became a crucial witness in the investigation. While the remaining people proceeded with their plan, Fernando went to a McDonald's on United Nations Avenue in Manila at 2:03 a.m. He ordered 2 cheeseburger combo meals to take away. He returned to the house and gave 1 meal to Julie. Fernando learns that Aldos and Efren attacked Julie. She was in shock, almost unresponsive, and couldn't speak clearly. Fernando assessed the situation and then stated that Julie needs to be dealt with. The tension inside the house intensified when one of the men accidentally said Fernando's real name while inside the vehicle. Julie may have heard it. Fernando feared that if she survived and recognized him by voice, she could become a serious problem. Investigators later confirmed that Aldos fired the first shot at Julie, followed by Efren. The firearm had been brought in advance, part of a plan that had clearly gone much further than intended. While Julie was still being held captive in the house on Leno Street in Quezon City, in the early morning hours, around 5 a.m., Julie's body was placed into a Mitsubishi Montero and driven away from Leno Street. The vehicle made a brief stop at 121 18th Avenue in Quezon City. There, the door opened, and her body was pulled out and left in a roadside ditch. Julie's family was worried when she didn't come home. Julie had never disappeared before and always kept in touch. This time, she hadn't contacted anyone. Her family tried to reach Althea, but she didn't answer. They started searching for her. The next morning, a news report about a young woman's body found in a ditch led Julie's mother, Luz, and her brother to the morgue. The clothes on the body matched what Julie had been wearing. Luz confirmed that the victim was Julie. This was devastating for the family. At this point, the police began investigating the connections between Julie, Althea, and Fernando. The day after Julie's body was found, investigators from the Criminal Investigation and Detection Unit started examining crucial evidence. They began by analyzing a McDonald's receipt clutched in the victim's hand. Using the time printed on the receipt, the police asked for security camera footage from the McDonald's on United Nations Avenue. The video showed a clear image of a man of medium height with noticeable tattoos ordering takeout at around 2 a.m. His face was easily recognizable. Concurrently, authorities were verifying details about a vehicle seen fleeing the scene. Witnesses had reported a black SUV, believed to be a Mitsubishi Montero. 2 individuals even partially recalled the license plate number. From this information, investigators traced the vehicle to a woman named Rosalina. A background check revealed that her son, Fernando Quiambao Jr., regularly used the vehicle, placing him at the center of the investigation. He matched the McDonald's customer's photo at 2 a.m. On the 9th of November, police began watching the Quiambao family's house. They didn't see Fernando the next day, but around 6 p.m., they saw his father, Fernando Quiambao Sr. Leave. He was driving a black Toyota Innova and heading northwest. Officers followed him without being noticed. About an hour later, Fernando Sr. stopped in Apalit, a small town in Pampanga province. He went inside a Bahay Kubo, a traditional Filipino house. Fernando's mother's Mitsubishi Montero was parked close by. Police then entered the property and found Fernando and Althea inside. They didn't resist arrest, and no weapons were found. A forensic team investigated the scene, and the suspects were taken to the station for questioning. Around midnight on the 11th of November, police entered the house that had been used to hold Julie. There were armed people inside, and a gunfight broke out. One suspect, Fahad Osman, also known as Bob, was killed. Then, Jaymar Waraji and Jilan Pasawa were arrested, charged with illegally having guns, and brought in for more questioning. At first, all suspects denied being involved in the crime. But as the questioning continued and the pressure mounted, their stories started to change. Jaymar admitted he was at the house where Julie was held and began to help the investigators. He said he agreed to help Fernando because he was loyal to him, explaining that Fernando often gave him and others alcohol and money. Jaymar identified Efren Talib and Aldos as others involved. Jaymar stated that Aldos acted on his own and made the situation worse than anyone anticipated. Althea, interviewed separately, gave her version of the events. She admitted to agreeing to lure Julie to the location, but claimed she had no idea that things would go as far as they did. She stated that she believed it was only meant to scare her. Fernando, for his part, remained silent during questioning and demanded that his arrest be ruled invalid, insisting there was no evidence directly linking him to the crime. The investigation eventually confirmed that 7 individuals were involved: Fernando Quiambao Jr., Althea Altamirano, Jaymar Waraji, Jilan Pasawa, Efren Talib, Aldos, Bob, who was fatally shot. It became clear that the events were not the result of a personal dispute or emotional outburst, but were part of a coordinated and premeditated plan that ended in a tragic loss of life. As details emerged, the case gained wide media attention, and the investigation moved into high gear. After Althea was arrested, she agreed to talk to detectives. However, she immediately became defensive. During questioning, she claimed her boyfriend, Fernando, had manipulated and pressured her. She said Fernando had threatened her in the past, so she felt forced to follow his plan. Althea claimed she went into shock after the abduction and didn't know what to do. This, she said, was why she initially lied to the police and hid what really happened. She insisted she didn't know where Julie was taken or what happened to her. Jaymar Waraji's account differed significantly from Althea. He gave investigators a detailed description of the plan's creation, identifying each person's role and explaining how the operation unfolded. Jaymar stated that Althea informed Fernando of Julie's location and created the cover story used to entice Julie to the meeting. He also claimed Althea knew the SUV, and the people in it were waiting. Investigators believed Althea's actions demonstrated her willing participation in the abduction. After the arrest of several suspects, Aldos and Efren disappeared. Police couldn't catch them, so they were declared fugitives, and a national alert was issued. Jaymar helped the police create images of them to show the public. However, Aldos and Efren remained free, avoiding capture not just in 2012, but for many years after. The case took a surprising turn when one of the detainees, Jilan Pasawa, was released on bail in January 2013. He had been charged with illegally possessing firearms, but investigators lacked solid proof connecting him to the deadly attack or any acts of violence. Shortly after his release, on June 15th, a violent event occurred at his Quezon City home. While his family was eating, an unidentified person entered the property and fatally shot him. Jilan's wife refused to cooperate with the investigation and signed a waiver preventing any further inquiry into the incident. Consequently, the perpetrator was never caught. Jilan's death was a setback for investigators because he could have been a witness in Julie's case. Although he claimed he wasn't involved in Julie's death, his part in planning her abduction remained unclear. Despite this, the case was officially closed because Julie's family declined to press charges. The public strongly criticized this decision, even though the attacker was known. The police couldn't act without the family's complaint due to existing laws. By the summer of 2013, almost everyone connected to the case was either arrested or had an arrest warrant out for them. Althea insisted she wasn't to blame for anything and denied knowing Aldous or Efren. However, witnesses, the order of events, and confirmed details all proved she was lying. By the end of the investigation, the authorities knew exactly who had made the important choices, who had participated in the crime, and who was still on the run. Nearly 12 years passed from the time of Julianne Rodelas's tragic death to the first sentencing in the case. For a long time, the investigation remained stalled. It wasn't until 2024 that a trial was finally scheduled for Fernando Quayambao Jr. and Althea Altamirano. The initial court date, set for the 12th of July, was rescheduled 3 times. Although the reasons for the delays weren't officially disclosed, the victim's family believed the repeated postponements only served the interests of the accused. The trial began in September and lasted several months. Court sessions examined witness statements, case files, surveillance footage, and text communications between the involved parties. Notably, the firearm used in the fatal incident was never recovered. 2 of the suspected perpetrators, Efren Talib and Aldous, remained fugitives. After the trial, the court found Fernando Quayambao Jr. guilty of kidnapping, being an accessory to a violent crime, and engaging in aggressive behavior. Fernando received a life sentence with a minimum of 22 to 40 years. He must also pay the victim's family 500,000 Philippine pesos as compensation. Althea Altamirano was found guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The court determined that there wasn't enough evidence to prove she knew beforehand that the kidnapping would involve fatal harm or aggression. Prosecutors couldn't directly prove she was at the crime scene after the kidnapping or that she had contact with Aldous or Efren. Therefore, she was only convicted of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Althea had already been detained for more than 12 years. The court decided that this time served satisfied her sentence and ordered her immediate release. She was also fined 100,000 pesos. This decision provoked a strong emotional reaction from the Rodelas family. Luz, Julie's mother, along with several of her siblings, attended the sentencing hearing. Alvin, one of the brothers, publicly stated that forgiveness was impossible. The family appealed to the Supreme Court, requesting a re-evaluation of Althea's actions. In their view, her role in the events was not secondary, but pivotal. She initiated the conflict, involved Fernando, and had a personal motive driving him. Aside from the legal aspects, the case brought up difficult ethical issues. The prosecution proposed 2 possibilities: professional jealousy and personal resentment, fueled by a desire for revenge. The first idea was that in the cutthroat world of modeling, leaking personal information could seriously harm someone's career, where image is everything. The second idea was that Julie's greater success, landing more important jobs and becoming more popular, upset their relationship. Althea lost control and began to see Julie as a competitor instead of a friend. This change and the resulting loss of status may have been very humiliating for Althea. The key unresolved issue is whether Althea should have anticipated the outcome. Legally, the answer was no, but the facts suggest otherwise. Althea was aware of the nature of the people involved and Fernando's history of aggression. She initiated the chain of events and then relinquished control to individuals known to use violence. The court's failure to acknowledge Althea's role in these events left the Rodelas family feeling that justice had not been served. 2 key individuals involved in carrying out the crime remain at large. The Rodelas family continues to push for a full review of the case. Julie's mother declared that she would keep fighting for justice and called Althea's release an insult to her daughter's memory. On June 19, 2021, in Italy's Brescia province, the highly anticipated summer car race, Mille Miglia, began. Cars started their journey on June 17, crossing half the country to reach Rome. As the participants made their way through Salò, tens of thousands of tourists lined the coast, enjoying the picturesque views of Lake Garda. With boats anchored along the shore, the race was set to continue the next day. And in the evening, people relaxed and celebrated, enjoying the city's nightlife. As dawn broke, the festive atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Journalists had gathered to cover the race when they noticed a boat drifting near Partes on Lake Garda. Upon closer inspection, they realized the vessel was severely damaged, as if it had hit rocks. Yet it remained afloat. When the boat was washed ashore, a dead man was found inside, curled in a fetal position and wearing a blue shirt, with dried blood everywhere. The scene resembled a horror movie. Along with his belongings, a woman's handbag was discovered on the boat, raising suspicions that he might not have been alone. Around the same time, a man named Enzo Garzarella visited the police station in Salò to report his son, Umberto Garzarella, missing. Umberto had left home the night before to watch the race and take a boat ride with his girlfriend. Although Umberto often went on such trips, they were usually brief, and he avoided sailing at night because of safety concerns. When Enzo noticed his son was missing for an unusually long time, he attempted to call him multiple times, growing increasingly worried when his son didn't answer. The Carabinieri were already aware of the found body in a wrecked boat on Lake Garda and brought Enzo to the scene for identification. Upon seeing his son Umberto's feet protruding from under a white sheet on the beach, Enzo immediately recognized him and fell to his knees, crying. Umberto, 37 at the time of his death, was well known in Salò as the owner of a company established by his father in 1996, specializing in servicing water heating boilers. He was a kind, tall and energetic man who loved sailing. Tragically, this was not the only distressing news that morning. Just a few kilometers away, another family was anxiously awaiting the return of their daughter, Greta Nedrotti, a 25-year-old economics student. She had also failed to come home after an evening walk on June 19, 2021. The last contact her parents had with her was that night, and from then on, her phone went unanswered. They tried not to worry, believing that she was celebrating the races and enjoying time with her boyfriend. Her family became even more alarmed when they woke up early in the morning and still saw no sign of Greta. However, their concern grew when they woke up early in the morning and still had not seen any sign of her. The situation grew more urgent when the Carabinieri from Salò contacted Greta's family, informing her father that they had found a bag containing her ID card. They did not mention that it had been discovered on a severely damaged boat. While it was already known that Greta had been on the broken boat, her exact fate remained unclear, leading to a decision not to cause further alarm for her parents. Nonetheless, this lack of transparency did little to alleviate their concerns, and the entire family was in a state of panic, actively searching for Greta. Initially, the investigation suggested that some sort of collision had occurred, resulting in Greta ending up in the water. After checking all local medical facilities and confirming that Greta had not been admitted, authorities speculated that she might still be in the lake or that she had already drowned. A search and rescue operation was launched on the water, and diving teams spent about 12 hours searching the lake. Eventually, Greta's body was discovered at the bottom. The condition of her body indicated a severe accident, as her legs were partially amputated, and she had numerous cuts and other injuries throughout. Upon hearing this devastating news, Greta's parents were heartbroken. They had held on to hope, refusing to believe that Greta would never come home. Just the day before, she had been trying on beautiful dresses in her room for an evening event. She had recently started dating a popular boy named Umberto Garzarella. Greta was a vibrant and friendly young woman, dedicated not just to her family but also to her education and career. In a statement to journalists, her father recalled seeing her last as she sat on the living room couch, reading before. hurriedly packing to leave. She had informed them she would return late that evening, but she never did. The loss of their only daughter was a profound shock for the family. When the news of Umberto and Greta's tragic deaths on the lake broke, local newspapers and news channels flooded the area. Continuous live broadcasts from the scene attracted interviews with locals who knew Umberto and were eager to share what a wonderful person he was. Greta's parents also spoke, highlighting their daughter's aspirations for a master's degree while working at an accounting firm. Those who knew her described her as intelligent and goal-oriented. Even Greta's ex-husband, with whom she had remained on friendly terms, spoke to the media. This revealed that Greta and Umberto were well-liked individuals, yet it did not clarify the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Questions arose about what had occurred on the lake, and even law enforcement was puzzled. Initial theories suggested that Umberto might have consumed too much alcohol or fallen asleep at the helm, leading to the collision. However, Umberto was an experienced sailor and handled boats well, making this scenario seem unlikely. A blood alcohol test showed he had only consumed about 1 glass of wine that evening, which would not significantly impair his judgment. Additionally, the damage to the boat above the waterline was unusual, with the side of the vessel appearing sliced significantly along the hull. The police contacted the lake's Coast Guard, and experts concluded that the boat had likely collided with another vessel traveling at high speed. The force of impact kept Umberto's boat from sinking, and pieces of a different colored hull were found in the breach. These fragments likely belonged to another vessel involved in the incident. During witness interviews from the night of the 19th of June, police spoke with a man who provided the first clue that could help solve the case. He reported hearing a loud bang late at night and then saw a large object moving away from the lake's shore. Due to the darkness and distance, he did not realize a collision had occurred. But after the crash, one of the boats appeared to drift away. Noticing a long, jagged hole on the starboard side of a boat, police decided to follow up on a report made to the lake's Coast Guard the previous day. However, there had been no calls about collisions or accidents on the water. That same morning, the Coast Guard discovered a damaged motorboat, the Riva Super Aquarema, which had an estimated value of around €800,000. At that moment, no one linked this boat to the deaths of Umberto and Greta. The Riva was moored at a small factory in Salo. Far from the race location, it was heavily damaged, particularly at the front, and wooden chips of a different color were found in its hull, likely from the second boat involved in the accident. A check confirmed that these parts matched components missing from Umberto's boat. The next step was to determine the owner of the damaged vessel. It turned out that the owner was Christian Theismann, a 50-year-old German tourist, who was vacationing at Lake Garda with his friend, 52 years old, Patrick Kasson, also from Germany. Both men were high-ranking executives at major international companies who had come to Salau to enjoy the lake, watch the race, and relax. They were easily located at a hotel near the pier where the wrecked boat was found. They appeared confused when they were taken in for questioning. They seemed unaware of the situation and were clearly intoxicated, smelling strongly of alcohol. Language barriers complicated communication since they did not speak Italian, and the Carabinieri did not speak German. Despite the difficulties, detectives have managed to piece together the events that occurred that evening. Patrick and Christian recounted that they spent most of the day on their boat. They walked along the lake shore, observing the race, and stopped at various docks in Brescia to buy drinks and snacks. Later in the evening, they dined at a restaurant, before boarding their boat again at 11 o'clock p.m. They believed that around 24 minutes later, they collided with Umberto's boat. However, their memories of the incident were vague, claiming they crashed into a large log without hearing any screams or seeing anyone, and then quickly returned to the pier at the hotel. Law enforcement agencies discovered surveillance cameras in the area and reviewed the footage, which captured the moments after a collision. Patrick and Christian did not stop to help Umberto and Greta. Instead, they sped towards the coast and docked near their hotel at 11:31 p.m. When Christian and Patrick got off their boat, CCTV footage showed them struggling to maintain their balance, clearly indicating they were very drunk. Patrick stumbled and fell onto the dock. The video clip of Patrick and Christian, who are suspected of wrongdoing, quickly went viral after it was leaked to the media. The release of the recording led to a public outcry within days. Local residents were furious with the behavior of the German tourists, Patrick and Christian, especially after learning that Christian had initially refused to take an alcohol test. Many believed he should have been tested since it was evident from the footage that he was barely able to stand. Eventually, Christian was convinced to take the test, which revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.29 part per million, even 14 hours after his detention. This indicated that he had been extremely impaired at the time of the accident and likely unable to comprehend the situation. It is worth noting that, when speaking with the Carabinieri, Patrick and Christian were irritable, insisting they had done nothing wrong and that they were being held unlawfully. They believed they had hit a log, which is why they didn't stop and return to shore before their boat sank. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage did not capture the speed of the men's boat. This sparked further discussions. While there were disagreements about the exact speed, many believed the boat was traveling faster than 30 kilometers per hour. This was supported not only by the damage to Umberto's boat but also by Greta's injuries. Coast Guard experts stated that Christian's boat was moving at a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour, significantly exceeding the allowed speed limit in the dark. Still unclear about the situation, Patrick and Christian hired lawyers. It is worth noting that, until that moment, they had not fully understood that their actions had resulted in the deaths of Umberto and Greta, largely due to a language barrier. Once they understood the seriousness of the incident, they became noticeably calmer. Preliminary hearings took place, after which Patrick and Christian were sent back to their home city of München. They were instructed to stay there until the trial commenced. This decision shocked the families of Umberto and Greta, as the two murderers were allowed to return home after signing written agreements not to leave. They carried on with their normal lives, seemingly unaffected. While waiting for the judge to set a trial date, from the outset, both Patrick and Christian had been listed as suspects for manslaughter and for failing to assist victims Umberto and Greta. This charge carried a relatively light sentence, with potential penalties of less than 10 years for the two lives they took. The trial was expected to be challenging, primarily because it was difficult to determine which man was operating the boat during the collision. Both Patrick and Christian claimed to have no recollection of the event. Detectives aimed to clarify this and other elements of the incident by gathering more evidence prior to the trial. Relying heavily on camera footage, the public reacted negatively to the decision to permit Patrick and Christian to return home, viewing it as an attempt to evade punishment and responsibility. Umberto's family and Greta's family felt that this leniency was facilitated by Patrick and Christian's wealth and connections, and they believed the suspects prioritized their freedom and reputations over the victims' lives. Moreover, the families were understandably worried that the suspects could escape justice. 2 weeks after the tragedy, Christian and Patrick sent letters of apology to Greta's parents and Umberto's parents. However, the families rejected these letters, which were printed rather than handwritten and bore no signatures. They viewed this gesture as insincere. This response was particularly upsetting given the horrific circumstances surrounding Umberto and Greta's deaths. Umberto died instantly from the force of the impact, while Greta suffered severe injuries, including multiple fractures from being struck. Initially, it was believed that Greta had drowned after being thrown from the boat due to the collision. However, the actual circumstances were even more tragic. The families mourned the loss of their children, burying them in their hometowns just days apart. In remembrance, they released hundreds of white balloons into the sky. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation, searching for information to determine who was driving the boat at the time of the accident. They gathered CCTV footage and interviewed witnesses. Eventually, they managed to obtain footage from a villa overlooking the lake in Port Sea that captured the collision. While the recording was grainy, it revealed important details. Clearly, the boat involved belonged to Patrick and Christian, and it collided with Umberto and Greta's boat. This footage clarified the circumstances of Greta's death, showing that she had not been thrown from the boat. She remained inside during the impact. After the collision, Patrick and Christian's boat was seen moving away from the damaged vessel. Moments later, something small fell into the water, resembling Greta's dress, and bloodstains were found on the boat's hull, initially thought to belong to Umberto. It seems that Greta was in a state of panic. She crawled over the side of the boat and jumped into the water, trying to swim to shore to save herself. However, due to the extent of her injuries, her legs were cut up. She struggled to swim and ultimately drowned. By September 2021, the prosecutor's office determined that Patrick was the one driving the boat, which belonged to his friend Christian. This meant Christian also held some responsibility for letting an untrained and intoxicated person operate his property. On July 5, Patrick went to the city prosecutor's office to surrender voluntarily. He wanted to avoid arousing too much attention and being taken into custody from his home in handcuffs. As he was concerned about the potential impact on his family, he confirmed that he was driving the boat, which resulted in a list of charges against him: 2 counts of manslaughter, failing to assist in a rescue, and operating a vessel while drunk, all of which contributed to the lake accident. Investigators had thoroughly reconstructed the events of that evening, revealing a picture of reckless behavior and excessive alcohol use. After the collision involving Umberto and Greta, the boat was tied to the shore, and Patrick and Christian did not return to their hotel. Instead, they went to another bar. They sustained only minor injuries, and when they were picked up the next morning, no serious injuries were reported. They failed to contact emergency services, even anonymously. Witnesses noted that 2 very intoxicated men who spoke German entered the bar. Struggling to form coherent sentences, one man hit his head on a wooden pillar and felt nauseous but refused assistance. By the end of September, the court announced that hearings would begin in November, during which time Patrick was held in custody. Meanwhile, the families of Umberto and Greta had received financial compensation from the insurance companies of Patrick and Christian. Prior to that, they sought justice for their loved ones, attending the hearings in support of their children. When Patrick finally took the stand, he personally apologized to the families of Umberto and Greta for the first time since the incident, asserting that they were unaware of the accident due to their drunkenness. However, this explanation sounded insincere. As of December 19, the hearings were still ongoing. For Umberto's parents, this date was particularly difficult because it marked what would have been their son's 38th birthday. Umberto's father approached Christian, urging him to take action to honor both Umberto and Greta. The next day, Christian unexpectedly visited Umberto's gravesite, where he apologized once again and shared his plans for a charity project aimed at supporting families affected by accidents. Patrick remained involved in the hearings, with his lawyer working to reduce his culpability. Initially, the lawyer disputed Patrick's level of intoxication, arguing that it was unprovable how much he had drunk before getting on the boat. An independent expert was hired to challenge the Coast Guard's conclusion that the boat was traveling over 40 kilometers per hour, claiming instead that it was going no faster than 10 kilometers per hour. Then events took a bizarre turn. The defense attempted to shift blame onto Umberto for not taking the necessary actions to avoid the boat. The lawyer accused Umberto of being negligent and violating maritime regulations. He also suggested that Greta may have failed to comply with safety regulations, as she was allegedly standing in the position where the collision occurred. Upon hearing this absurd defense, Umberto's father left the courtroom in frustration. Christian's lawyer even claimed that Christian was asleep while the boat was moving, implying he could not control Patrick's actions. In March 2022, a lengthy trial was concluding. Prosecutors sought a 5-year prison sentence for Patrick Casson and 5 years for his friend Christian Theismann. However, the court only accepted part of these claims. Patrick, who had been driving the boat, was sentenced to 5 years, and Christian received a sentence of 2 years and 6 months. The court's decision focused solely on the manslaughter charge and did not consider their failure to assist the victims. Umberto and Greta. This shows that their irresponsibility was overlooked, as their testimony that they thought they had hit a large log was accepted without any doubt. By May, the appellate court upheld the sentences, which then took effect. Families of Umberto and Greta, along with concerned citizens, expressed their outrage at the court's leniency, especially regarding who was actually steering the boat. Surveillance footage revealed that when the two men departed from shore, it was Christian, the boat owner, who was in control, not Patrick. Friends of Patrick and Christian stated that the owner, Christian, rarely allowed anyone else to steer the boat. This raised important questions about who was at the helm and whether Patrick and Christian had switched places. Umberto and Greta's families attempted to challenge this point but were unsuccessful. The only course of action left for them was to advocate for a change in the law to ensure stricter penalties for such incidents. Consequently, a petition was launched to equate water-related accidents with those occurring on roads. On September 20, 2023, the Chamber of Deputies approved the bill after gathering 100,000 signatures. It passed with 288 votes in favor and only one against. This amendment to the criminal code is informally named after Umberto and Greta. Thanks to this initiative, penalties for causing death in a water accident can now range from 2 to 18 years in prison, while penalties for causing bodily harm can go up to 7 years. Kelly was born on August 1, 1982, in Elmira, New York. She was the youngest of Elizabeth Stage and Howard Stage's 3 children. Her father, Howard, was well regarded in the community, having been the chief of the West Elmira Volunteer Fire Department for many years. Kelly's older sister, Kim Bourgeois, who was 10 years older. It was very protective of her. Kim felt like a second mother to Kelly, describing her as very brave, sassy. Kelly enjoyed dancing and was very beautiful. She had the potential to be a model. That was her aspiration. Kelly had a vibrant personality and big ambitions. This led her to leave her teaching job and move from her hometown to Las Vegas. There, she became a cocktail waitress. She loved her new life, enjoying the glamour and wearing extravagant costumes. Kim recalled how much Kelly enjoyed the fast-paced and exciting atmosphere of Las Vegas, even wearing a 30-pound feather headdress to work. Then, Kelly returned to Elmira because she was drawn to Thomas Clayton, a well-known hockey player for the Elmira Jackals. Clayton had a reputation both for his performance in the semi-professional league and his behavior outside of it. Kim later said that people admired him because he was attractive, a troublemaker, which many found captivating. Thomas was from Binghamton, New York, and studied at Niagara University, where he played ice hockey. He then joined the Elmira Jackals and played forward for 4 seasons, from 1998 to 2002. During this time, he became a popular figure in the small town due to his charm and athletic ability. However, his reputation was also affected by his reckless behavior and numerous relationships with different women. Kelly and Thomas were instantly attracted to each other when they met at a hockey game while she was visiting home for Christmas. Even though Thomas was known for being reckless and having a bad reputation, Kelly was captivated by his charm and popularity. Their connection was so strong that Kelly quickly decided to give up her thrilling life in Las Vegas and move to New York to begin a new chapter with Thomas. They married within a year of meeting. Kelly changed her last name to Clayton, her husband's last name. They settled in Caton, New York, to start their life together. Everyone thought they were deeply in love and had found something special. After an injury ended Thomas's hockey-playing days, he shifted his career focus and became the owner of a water and fire damage restoration franchise called Paul Davis Emergency Services of the Southern Tier. He later became a project manager at Serve Pro, a similar franchise owned by his close friend Brian Lang. Thomas seemed dedicated to building a successful business and providing for his growing family. Kelly Clayton embraced her new role as a wife and mother while also working as a waitress at the Woodhouse Stadium Grill in Corning. Their first child, Charlie Emma, was born in 2008, followed by their son, Cullen, a few years later. To outsiders, the Clayton family appeared perfect. Kelly balanced, caring for their 2 children with her job, and Thomas ran his business successfully. They were busy, but seemed like a happy family of 4. However, their marriage was starting to show signs of trouble. Thomas had become a gambler and openly carried a lot of cash. The couple kept cash in 2 safes at home, and Thomas frequently took large sums to casinos for high-stakes poker. His gambling was becoming a serious problem. Once, he even lent his car to a friend's sister, while unaware that $22,000 was in the trunk. As Thomas and Kelly's marriage went on, Thomas's unhappiness and restlessness became obvious to their friends and family. Kelly was dedicated to their family and marriage, but Thomas seemed emotionally detached. He started having affairs. During these affairs, Thomas often complained to the other women about Kelly, calling her lazy and saying he wanted to leave her. However, he always told them he couldn't divorce her because she would take everything. This suggests that Thomas wanted to end the marriage but didn't want to pay for a divorce. About a year before Kelly's death, a major warning sign appeared. Thomas doubled her life insurance policy from $500,000 to $1 million. This large increase, along with his affairs and complaints, suggested he was planning something terrible. Thomas mistreated his employees. He would often keep them in debt to him, using tactics such as giving them loans, extra work. Michael Beard was one such employee. Thomas seemed to use this debt to control his employees, making them dependent on him. Michael had worked for Thomas at Thomas's businesses and at ServPro, a company owned by Thomas's friend, Brian Lang. Because of this, Michael knew the Clayton family's home well, including its layout. He had worked there many times and had been trusted to enter their private areas. However, Michael was fired from ServPro just 12 days before Kelly Clayton's murder. He was fired because of complaints about drinking, banned substance use, and stealing from clients' homes. This left him in financial difficulty. He couldn't pay rent to Thomas for his apartment, and he didn't have a car or a driver's license, making his situation even worse. After firing Michael, Thomas seems to help him by suggesting job opportunities and buying him a bicycle. During the next 12 days, they spoke on the phone often, a detail that became important later in the trial, thanks to cell phone records. Although it looked like Thomas was simply helping a former employee who was struggling, the prosecution argued that he was actually exploiting Michael's financial hardship to pressure him into committing murder. On September 28, 2015, Thomas and Luke Tetrol, an employee, switched trucks that day to make unloading easier. However, a security camera footage from a storage unit near the company revealed the truck swap was carefully planned. That Monday evening, Thomas drove to Greg Miller's house in Corning for their regular poker night. Arriving around 8:00 p.m., he used a company truck instead of his own car. Greg and his wife, Linda, hosted the weekly game where friends and neighbors played low-stakes poker until late. On the 28th of September, 2015, Thomas seemed fine during the game. But before 11:00 p.m., he asked Linda Miller to use her phone. This simple request would later prove to be important evidence. Around 10:50 p.m., Thomas called Michael from Linda's phone. This call initiated the murder plot. At the time, Michael was at home, arguing with his partner. After the call, around 11:30 p.m., Michael left home on his bicycle. He rode to ServPro, where he retrieved the maroon truck Thomas had left for him. Next, Michael picked up Mark Blanford. Blanford later stated he didn't know about the murder plot and thought he was just watching out for a break-in. The maroon truck arrived back at the company parking lot at 12:55 a.m. On September 29, 2015, surveillance footage showed someone leaving the parking lot on a bicycle a few minutes later, presumably Michael returning home. Back at the Clayton home, Kelly was with her 2 young children. She had no idea about the terrible events that were about to happen. Around midnight, Michael used a key Thomas had given him to enter the house through the garage. He was wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask. Charlie later said the mask looked like one her father wore when hunting. Kelly was asleep in her bedroom when Michael broke into her house and went upstairs. He attacked her in the master bedroom, hitting her twice with the handle of a fiberglass maul. The attack woke Kelly, but she fought back and tried to escape. She ran from the bedroom towards her daughter's room down the hall. While trying to get away, Kelly fell down the stairs, hitting the wall at the bottom. She then ran through the dining room into the kitchen, but Michael caught her and continued hitting her with the maul handle. He brutally beat her head and face until she died from her injuries. On September 29, 2015, sometime after 12:30 am, Thomas came home from a poker game and found his wife, Kelly, dead in the kitchen. He said she was lying in a pool of blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle that started in the bedroom, continued down the hallway and stairs, and ended in the kitchen, where Kelly died. Thomas called 911, appearing shocked and upset while reporting his wife's death. However, investigators quickly became suspicious. They felt his behavior and description of the scene seemed insincere. Police officers arriving at the scene found a very bloody crime scene. According to Deputy Dean Swan, Deputy Swan's body camera recorded the shocking aftermath, which he described as almost unbelievable. Evidence showed that Kelly had been beaten to death with great force, resulting in severe head and facial injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing from the house. This eliminated robbery as a motive, suggesting the attack was personal and intended only to kill Kelly. Within hours of the murder, Kelly's family members arrived at the scene. Her sister, Kim Bourgeois, and her mother, Elizabeth, were at the house within an hour of the police's arrival. Kim later described the horror of that moment. Her mother and her were wailing. She was throwing up on the side of the road. She can't even explain to you that feeling. The most devastating part of this crime was that Kelly's 7-year-old daughter, Charlie, saw much of it. When police questioned her, Charlie, being so young, first said the person who broke in was a robber. However, her detailed story was very important in solving the case. Charlie told investigators that a man came in and hit her mommy with something like a pipe. She thought her mommy was dead when she saw her on the ground. Charlie also remembered that during the attack, her mother told her to run away, showing that Kelly was trying to protect her daughter even as she was dying. Sheriff Jim Allard felt a chill when Charlie, asked how she knew the intruder was male, replied, "Because his eyes looked just like Daddy's." This statement made Thomas a suspect in his wife's murder, despite his apparent alibi. In a later interview at the Chemung County Child Advocacy Center, Charlie gave more details about the intruder. She described him as wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask similar to one her father wore hunting. When asked to clarify how the intruder resembled her father, Charlie specified his mask and jeans, confirming she had seen her father wear similar items. As investigators began to piece together what had happened, they immediately focused on Thomas as a potential suspect. While his alibi appeared solid, he had been at the poker game with multiple witnesses who could corroborate his presence. Something about the situation didn't add up. The investigation changed significantly when Linda Miller, Greg's wife who was at the poker game, informed the police that Thomas had asked to use her cell phone about 90 minutes before Kelly's body was found. This detail became important when investigators learned that Thomas had called Michael Beard using Linda's phone. Phone records showed that Thomas and Michael had been in frequent contact in the days before the murder. This was strange because Michael no longer worked for Thomas. This increased communication, along with Michael's recent firing and money problems, pointed to a possible murder-for-hire scheme. When police questioned Michael Beard, he initially confessed to killing Kelly Clayton. He stated that Thomas hired him to murder Kelly and burn down the house to collect insurance money. Michael described the murder plot discussions, Starting in April 2015, Thomas allegedly offered him $10,000 for a job that could lead to jail time. Without specifying what it was, Michael joked about killing Thomas's wife for that amount, and Thomas smiled but didn't elaborate. The plan allegedly became firm after Michael was fired from ServPro on September 17, 2015. Michael said Thomas picked him up that day and asked how he would earn income and pay rent. Michael, who lived in Thomas's apartment, claimed Thomas offered him 5 months of free rent, plus the $10,000, to kill Kelly. However, in a stunning turn of events, Michael later recanted his confession before the trial. He changed his story completely, claiming that Thomas had only hired him to burn down the house for insurance money, and that when he arrived at the Clayton home, he found Kelly already dead. According to this new version of events, Michael panicked upon seeing the body and fled without setting the fire, which explained why the house was never burned. After confessing initially, Michael showed the police where he had discarded important evidence after the murder. This included the murder weapon, hidden in a wooded area, blood-stained clothes he wore during the attack, and keys to the Clayton home that Thomas had given him to enter the house. The bloody clothes were found in a swamp about 40 feet from an inn in Elmira. Thomas had previously asked about surveillance cameras at that same inn. DNA tests confirmed that the blood on the clothing was Michael's, providing undeniable proof that he was involved in the murder. Even though Michael later denied his involvement, investigators had strong physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Crucially, Michael's DNA was found on the fiberglass handle of the maul, which was the murder weapon used to kill Kelly. Meanwhile, the case against Thomas Clayton was built largely on circumstantial evidence, but it was overwhelming in its scope and detail. Surveillance footage from the storage facility next to ServPro showed the carefully orchestrated vehicle exchange that allowed Michael to use Thomas's truck to travel to and from the murder scene. GPS data from the company trucks provided a detailed timeline of movements on the night of the murder. The data showed Thomas driving a green ServPro truck that left the company at 6:10 p.m. and arrived at the Clayton home at 7:25 p.m. The truck left the Clayton home at 7:37 p.m. and arrived in Corning 14 minutes later for the poker game. More crucially, the GPS data picked up again on the 29th of September, 2015, when Thomas turned on the truck at 12:22 a.m. and showed the vehicle arriving back at the Clayton home at 12:35 a.m. The time when he allegedly discovered Kelly's body and called 911. The investigation showed that Thomas wanted Kelly dead for 2 main reasons: money and personal desires. He had secretly doubled her life insurance. Also, he was having affairs and wanted to end his marriage without losing money in a divorce. During the trial, 3 women testified that they had relationships with Thomas while he was married. One of these women was only 15 years old when the affair occurred. The prosecution argued that Thomas wanted to be free from his marriage and collect Kelly's life insurance. Therefore, he found it easier to hire someone to kill her than to get a divorce. His relationships with other women proved he was unhappy in his marriage, but didn't want to deal with the financial consequences of a divorce. Michael Beard and Thomas Clayton were tried separately for first-degree murder. Michael's trial occurred first. In late 2016, although he retracted his confession, the jury convicted him based on the strong physical evidence. Michael Beard was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder in November 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison in February 2017. Beard is serving his sentence at Auburn State Prison. Clayton's trial began in early 2017 and lasted several weeks. In February 2017, after 6 weeks of proceedings and 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Thomas Clayton guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced in April 2017 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, Clayton insisted on his innocence, stating he had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kelly. Clayton is incarcerated at Sing Sing State Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. Mark Blanford, 53, pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. Blanford began serving his sentence in April 2017 and was released on parole in late August 2020 from the Cayuga Correctional Facility in Moravia. According to the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, the most tragic aspect of this case was its impact on Kelly's children. In a heartbreaking letter read at Thomas's sentencing, Charlie wrote, "I love my mom. I love my dad. But my dad is a coward because he made Michael Beard kill my mommy." Custody of the children was given to Kelly's sister, Kim Bourgeois, who has worked tirelessly to provide them with a loving home. The murder of Kelly Stage Clayton has left a deep wound in the quiet community of Caton, New York, which prides itself on its reputation as a small town. The death of Kelly, a devoted mother and vibrant woman, is not only a devastating blow to her family, but also a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. Thomas Clayton, driven by financial intrigue and personal grievance, hired Michael Beard to carry out the brutal crime, taking the life of the wife he had promised to love and protect. Charlie's innocent yet haunting testimony became the key to bringing the truth to light, proving that justice can be served even in the most heartbreaking circumstances. Although Thomas and Michael were sentenced to life in prison, nothing could ease the pain of Charlie and Cullen, who had lost their beloved mother. Thanks to the loving care of Kim Bourgeois, Kelly's children are now in a new home. But this story reminds us of the value of honesty, family unity, and the importance of facing conflict with honesty rather than violence. One morning in June in Occitania, France, Amandine Estrabaud, a high school assistant from the small town of Roquecourbe, left for work. That evening, neighbors didn't see her near her home. The next day, her phone stopped working, and her front door was unlocked. Something is fishy. From a young age, Amandine was involved in community events, including the local festival committee. She had a very close and friendly relationship with her mother. She was also close to her brother, Remy. People in Roquecourbe affectionately called Amandine and Remy the village children. After breaking up with her partner, Amandine moved back to her hometown. She was independent and actively involved in life. Even though she had previously lived with her partner near the Castres train station, Amandine hoped to study speech-language pathology and intended to buy a car. There was no indication that she had disappeared voluntarily or was experiencing a serious emotional breakdown. On Tuesday, June 18, 2013, Amandine went to work at the lycée. It was a typical day. She spent the morning helping staff, and everything seemed fine. Around 1:10 p.m., she finished her work and left. Usually, someone drove her home because she didn't have a car. However, that day, no one could give her a ride. Having no other option, she started walking home alone. The walk was approximately 8 miles long and would take her nearly 3 hours to complete. Around 2:15 p.m., Amandine was reportedly seen in the salvage area near a bus stop just a few miles from her home. This was the last confirmed public sighting of her. What happened afterward is still unclear, but investigators have pieced together a possible sequence of events based on second-hand accounts. Although there was no surveillance footage or other hard evidence, a neighbor named Karine helped piece together a key part of the timeline. Karine lived nearby and had a clear view of Amandine's front door from her home. Around 4 p.m., she noticed a white Renault traffic van parked outside, a vehicle she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. It didn't belong to any locals and stood out as unfamiliar. Amandine got out of the van first. She appeared calm, was wearing normal clothes, and didn't seem upset. Karine saw her holding a bag on her lap and looking for her keys. Amandine unlocked the door and went inside. Soon after, a man got out of the van. Karine couldn't see his face clearly because she only saw him from behind and he was far away. However, She remembered he was about 170 centimeters tall and had a sturdy build. He was wearing gray work pants with large pockets and orange reflective stripes, like those worn by construction, road, or utility workers. Although Karine couldn't see his face, his behavior didn't seem suspicious. He walked calmly and wasn't aggressive. Karine said there was no argument or tension between him and Amandine. They seemed to interact in a normal. She didn't hear any yelling or signs of a fight. Investigators recorded Karine's statement, and it became important to the case. On June 19, Amandine's mother, Monique, started to worry. They usually met up, and had planned to do so the day before. They were very close and always kept in contact. Monique called several times throughout the day and evening, but Amandine didn't answer. Amandine always returned calls quickly if she missed them, but this time Monique heard nothing. Monique initially wasn't worried, assuming Amandine was occupied. However, when she still hadn't received any contact by the following morning, Monique decided to drive to Amandine's home. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked. This immediately alarmed her. Amandine was always cautious, especially living in a secluded area. Inside, everything looked as if Amandine had just stepped out for a moment. A jacket hung neatly on a chair. Her everyday bag was in its usual place. Her phone was left out and unattended. The home was quiet. Monique called out, but no one responded. There were no signs of urgent errands or a quick departure. A visual inspection of the home's interior revealed no signs of disorder. Everything was in its place. No forced entry. No displaced furniture. No items thrown around. Monique felt strongly that something was wrong. Amandine was usually very organized and predictable. Especially recently, she always kept her phone with her, told someone where she was going, and locked her door. Because Amandine wasn't acting like herself, Monique decided to call the police. She contacted the local police station in Roca-Courbe. Officers came to the house and looked around. They saw the same things Monique did. There was no sign of a fight. The door hadn't been forced open, and it didn't look like anyone had broken in. It seemed like Amandine had left on her own without being forced. However, after the officers went outside, they found something disturbing. Behind the house, accessible through a sliding glass door, was a garden. While the yard was overgrown, a specific patch of grass caught their attention. It was a rectangular area, about 5 by 5 feet, where the grass was noticeably flattened. The ground was even, and the plants were pressed down, suggesting something or someone had been there for a long time or had exerted force on the area. This suggests that a struggle may have taken place. Near this location, police found some of Amandine's belongings, including a pair of light shoes, identified by Monique as the ones Amandine wore the previous day, and 2 earrings. The earrings were damaged at the clasps, suggesting they may have been pulled off forcefully, perhaps during a struggle. This was the first physical evidence suggesting that something unusual happened to Amandine. Even though the search that day didn't turn up anything new, the investigators had enough information to consider Amandine's case a suspicious disappearance. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. The case quickly moved into its active phase. The first step was to review any available surveillance footage. Though cameras were few and far between in the area, authorities also canvassed potential routes Amandine could have taken on the 18th of June, prioritizing anyone who might have seen her that day. The speedy efforts, no new sightings surfaced beyond what had already been documented. Soon, missing person bulletins were issued. Amandine was described as approximately 165 meters tall with long dark hair. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a brown skirt that fell above the knee, a light tan jacket, and a dark blouse. Flyers were posted around the region at bus stops, on bulletin boards, and in local shops. Notices also ran in regional newspapers and on local radio stations. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. At the same time, many people were searching the area between Cantigolan and Salvage, near Amandine's house. volunteers and officials looked carefully through forests, fields, and along the Agout River. Even though they searched a large area, they didn't find Amandine or anything that belonged to her. Each passing day made it less likely that Amandine had left on her own. Her bank account remained untouched, and there were no phone calls or messages to suggest a voluntary disappearance. Everything pointed to something far more troubling, most likely a crime. In the initial weeks of the investigation, the primary theory quickly became that she was the victim of a violent crime committed by someone else. The investigation then focused a company in Rokukurb because they owned a utility van matching the description of one seen near Amandine's residence. Furthermore, the uniforms their employees wore were similar to what the man seen entering Amandine's house was wearing. Garrick Johano, 25, mason at this company, was originally from the area and knew many people, including Amandine's brother, Ray. Before working at the construction firm, Garrick cut granite. His name came up in the case in April 2014 when his mother, Irma, contacted the authorities. She was worried about her son's behavior. Irma said Garrick kept making strange statements, such as, "I'm not a criminal," and, "If they find blood in the van, it's from fish." He mentioned strange smells he encountered while fishing or mushroom hunting and claimed he could smell death. He had become increasingly paranoid, believing people were watching and hunting him. He once said he saw someone in the woods with a shovel, but didn't report it. It was uncertain if these were intrusive thoughts, delusions, or signs of emotional distress. Following his mother's statement, Garrick was questioned for the first time. He was detained for 48 hours in June 2014, but denied any involvement in Amandine's disappearance. Company records initially supported his alibi, showing he was assigned to a construction site in Castres on the 18th of June. His supervisor and colleagues confirmed his presence. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies. A supervisor admitted that after a concrete delivery to a construction site near Rokurib, a 6-minute drive from Amandine's home, he had approximately 90 minutes unaccounted for. None of Garrick's colleagues could confirm his location during that time. It was possible he used the company van to travel near Amandine's residence. Therefore, his whereabouts during a crucial period remained unknown. The neighbor who last saw Amandine before she disappeared was asked if she recognized Garrick. She couldn't say for sure if he was the man she saw. In Rokurb, she knew many people by sight, including Garrick. She did mention that Garrick's usual work pants looked like the ones the man was wearing that day. However, because she only saw the man from behind and through her window, she couldn't formally identify him. Although there wasn't definitive proof, the growing amount of information pointed to Garrick as the main suspect. Even without direct evidence connecting him to Amandine Estrabad's disappearance, he was the first and only person investigators seriously considered. After questioning him, Garrick was released because there wasn't enough legal justification to hold him. Investigators were also trying to figure out why Garrick was in Amandine's home. Initially, they found no clear link between them. However, some people who knew Garrick said he was interested in Amandine. A friend remembered Garrick calling her attractive and openly showing his feelings. Also, Amandine had a small problem at home, a possible water leak in a room, perhaps while running into him on the street or near her home, and he offered to help, mentioning his construction experience. This could explain why he was in her home without forcing his way in. Her relaxed behavior that day suggests she knew him at least a little. All of these elements led to the first working theory in the case. Garrick might have used the situation as an opportunity to get closer to her. But something went very wrong. The motive, actions, and consequences were still unclear, but a coherent narrative was starting to form. In June 2016, 2 months after Garrick was arrested for abduction and unlawful confinement, the investigation changed course significantly. Weeks after his initial arrest, he was also charged with premeditated murder. This new charge was based on testimonies from several inmates who had been in the same cell block as Garrick while he was awaiting trial. These inmates claimed that Garrick had spoken openly about his role in Amandine's disappearance, One inmate stated that Garrick described abuse-aggressive actions followed by Amandine's death. This inmate provided details that had not been released to the public, suggesting Garrick had direct knowledge of the events. Garrick allegedly confessed to disposing of Amandine's body and hiding her belongings. One inmate reported this information to investigators in a recorded interview. These inmate testimonies were considered credible, especially since no other confessions had been made in the case at that point. Then, Garrick provided 2 hand-drawn maps. The first map showed where he claimed to have buried a body and covered it with lime. The second map showed the coordinates where he said Amandine's jewelry was hidden. Both maps had Amandine's name on them. These maps led to a large search operation in the area Garrick indicated. For several weeks, search teams, including archaeologists from Institut National de Recherches Archéologiques Préventives, searched the difficult, wooded terrain near Ambres. The area was mountainous with steep ravines, streams, and thick vegetation. They used ground-penetrating radar and carefully examined caves and natural pits. However, despite the detailed maps and the extensive search, they found neither a body nor Amandine's jewelry. Later, Garrick changed his account. He claimed the drawings had nothing to do with Amandine's disappearance. Instead, he said they showed his favorite spots for fishing and mushroom picking. He suggested he wrote Amandine's name on them either to keep people away from his spots or to gain respect from other inmates. His lawyers argued that he was deliberately trying to seem intimidating to avoid trouble in prison. Although Garrick later contradicted his initial statements, those statements still carried legal significance. Investigators emphasized that Garrick revealed details that only someone directly involved would likely know. This insider knowledge strongly suggested his involvement, even though he hadn't confessed. The case against him relied not on one specific piece of evidence, but on a combination of factors, circumstantial details that aligned his actions, his words, and information that was unlikely to be known by someone not involved. Over 7 years after Amandine Estrabad vanished, the trial of Garrick Jahano began on October 8, 2020. In the Albi Court of Assizes, Garrick Jahano was charged with kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, and murder. The case was unusual because there was no body, confession, DNA, blood, or any other direct physical evidence. Despite the lack of direct proof, the prosecution thought the indirect evidence was compelling enough to justify presenting the case to a jury. Garrick's alibi had contradictions and his past statements had inconsistencies, which were part of the evidence presented in the trial. Digital records also raised suspicion. His gaming console, which he used every day, was not turned on the night in question. He claimed he just didn't play, but he had previously told investigators that he spent the evening playing PlayStation. This contradiction was important to the prosecution. Garrick's behavior in court was met with varying reactions. Journalists observed that he seemed uninterested in the trial, refused to look at pictures of Amandine, and didn't react to her mother's emotional statements. When questioned about his feelings while viewing Amandine's picture, Garrick stated that he felt nothing. This seeming lack of emotion strengthened the impression that he was emotionally distant and detached. Several witnesses characterized him as a withdrawn individual who became aggressive when intoxicated, and these observations were officially documented in the court records. Garrick denied all charges. His lawyers argued that the prosecution lacked direct evidence and that the case relied on speculation. They claimed the prosecution's case was built on guesses, unreliable inmate statements, and indirect evidence. The prosecution responded that the inconsistencies in Garrick's story, the absence of any other reasonable explanation, and Garrick's actions strongly suggested he was involved in a violent event. On October 14, 2020, Garrick Jahano was found guilty by a jury of abducting Amandine Estrabad, unlawfully detaining her, and causing her death. He received a 30-year prison sentence, which he will serve in a high-security prison. The court stated that the evidence presented, even without Amandine's body being found, was compelling and consistent enough to convict him. This case was highly publicized and is one of the few times in French legal history that someone has been convicted of homicide when the victim's body was never recovered. After being initially found guilty, Garrick appealed the decision. A second trial started on November 15, 2021. At the Toulouse Appellate Court in the Haute-Garonne department, the charges against Garrick remain. The defense argued that he was convicted despite a lack of evidence. One lawyer likened the case to other unsolved disappearances in the area, such as Delphine Jubilar's, who disappeared without a trace in December 2020. Like Amandine's case, Jubilar's body was never found. The prosecution, however, restated its arguments. The focus remained on Garrick's questionable alibi, his unaccounted for movements during the key time window, his inconsistent statements, and his suspicious behavior following Amandine's disappearance. New details also emerged regarding his concerning online activity, highlighting a pattern of obsessive and troubling internet behavior, including viewing content with deviant themes. Prosecutors laid out a likely scenario. Garrick offered Amandine a ride, possibly under the pretext of helping inspect her home after she had mentioned plumbing issues. Once inside, an incident occurred, possibly a confrontation following unwanted advances, which escalated and ended fatally. Defense lawyers denied this version, pointing out that no one saw him leaving the house, and there was no physical evidence of aggression. On the 19th of November, 2021, the appellate court upheld the original verdict. Garrick Jahano was again found guilty. But contrary to the Estrabad family's hopes, the 2021 ruling wasn't the final chapter. In 2022, the Court of Cassation overturned the decision due to a procedural error. One required legal phrase was missing from the court's written justification. Though the omission was technical, it triggered a mandatory retrial. The third trial occurred in January 2024 in Montalban, Tarn-et-Garonne. The prosecution repeated their previous arguments, claiming the amount of circumstantial evidence proved guilt. They again used Garrick's statements from prison, his drawings, and previous inconsistencies in his behavior as evidence. The defense tried to prove Garrick was not at the crime scene and had no connection to the crime was an Eversound. Garrick, who had turned 35 by the time of the hearings, once again denied all charges. In a surprising twist, his mother changed her story, claiming she never said the things attributed to her in the official records. This sudden reversal caused a strong reaction from both the court and the prosecution, as her original statements had played a key role in launching the investigation. Despite efforts by the defense to dismantle the central elements of the case, they were unsuccessful. On the 30th of January, 2024, Garrick Jahano was found guilty for the third time on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and committing a fatal act against Amandine. He was once again sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, the Court of Cassation rejected his final appeal, confirming the verdict as legally binding. The disappearance of Amandine Estrabad led to a highly unusual and controversial trial in France, resulting in 3 guilty verdicts, despite the absence of a body, a confession, and direct physical evidence. This case deeply divided the public. Some believed the verdicts were just and essential, while others felt they were based on too little certainty. Legal experts pointed out that the convictions were based on the bundle of clues principle, a legal concept where a collection of individually weak pieces of evidence can, when combined, create a strong case for guilt. While legal in France, this approach naturally raises the question: at what point does reasonable doubt become too significant to ignore? Not all families are harmonious. Some hide deep conflict, so deep that one day, hatred erupts into bloody tragedy. In today's story, Maria del Carmen Hilares was brutally murdered by her own daughter, Juliana Llamoja. 65 stab wounds tore the mother's body apart, her face disfigured beyond recognition. A horrific scene that made even seasoned police officers shudder. But what's more shocking, Juliana didn't serve a life sentence, nor décadas behind bars. In just a few years, the girl walked free, even appearing on television, smiling at the camera. How could such a terrible crime end like that? And what secrets lie behind Peru's most controversial sentence to uncover why a daughter could turn against her own mother? We must go back to where it all began. A family that looked perfect from the outside, but was slowly being torn apart from within. María del Carmen Hilares married Luis Llamoja Flores, a well-respected and highly paid judge. Maria works as a secretary at the military prosecutor's office, helping her family live a comfortable life. Their relationship developed quickly, and they decided to get married, later having 3 children, a daughter named Juliana and 2 sons. Juliana was her father's favorite. She was spoiled and always sought to please him. For nearly 20 years, the family enjoyed a seemingly perfect life in San Juan de Miraflores, Lima, Peru. Her father, Luis, was very proud of his daughter's creativity and love of art. By age 13, she was writing poetry and winning competitions, continuing her success as she pursued a law degree at the University of the Sacred Heart, aspiring to become a judge like her father. In contrast, Juliana's younger brothers were closer to their mother, Maria, which created tension in the household, especially between her and her mother. As Juliana matured, their relationship soured, with frequent arguments over everything from her clothing choices to her social circle. Maria suspected that Juliana had stolen her money and jewelry. Juliana's younger brother, Luis Llamoja Hilares, supported the accusation, as he was well aware of her misdeeds, which included stealing a classmate's bank card. Maria felt angry with her husband, Luis, for spoiling Juliana, making her dependent and not respecting basic rules. On the contrary, Juliana often belittled her mother by reminding her of her lack of higher education and professional status. Although Maria sought support from Luis, he consistently sided with their daughter, which created a tense atmosphere. Neighbors noticed the tense atmosphere between mother and daughter due to the constant quarrels. And they saw that Juliana changed when interacting with others, becoming happier. This dynamic was exacerbated by Luis's neglect of Maria, as he prioritized his relationship with Juliana, often treating her like a romantic partner. During family outings, Luis would take Juliana in the front seat while Maria was relegated to the back, reinforcing the emotional distance between them. As a result, Maria grew closer to her sons, who struggled to comprehend Juliana's behavior, which seemed aimed at provoking their mother. On Saturday, March 26, 2005, a troubling situation arose in their family home. Luis was away from home for a few days because he was on a business trip to Argentina with his youngest son. This left Maria, Juliana, and her younger brother Hilaris at home. During the first days of their father's absence, Juliana stole jewelry from her mother's closet and spent the night out. When she returned, she was wearing her mother's jewelry, which angered her mother, but the yelling had little effect on her. Later that evening, Juliana ran away to be with friends and returned home drunk after midnight, banging on the door and claiming she had lost her keys. Hilaris, awakened by her noise, suspected she was trying to annoy their mother on purpose. Juliana ignored her mother's rules, insisting she was 18 and could do what she pleased. The following morning, she acted as if nothing was wrong. When she asked for pocket money, her mother Maria gave it to her without hesitation. Shortly after, Maria received a call from her husband and reported that things were going well. Maria seemed unfazed by the ongoing family drama and didn't recognize the unusual behavior from Juliana. She believed her daughter was attending school and taking money for transportation and lunch. However, Hilaris knew she didn't have classes that day. When he pointed this out, Maria realized Juliana had tricked her again for cash, which frustrated her. On March 28, 2005, Hilaris and Maria woke up early. Hilaries had just graduated high school and was preparing for university, so they decided to go shopping for supplies. At the store, Maria discovered her bank card was missing from her bag. Assuming she left it at home, she arranged to pick up their items the next day. As they leave the supermarket, Maria warns Hilaries that if Juliana steals the card, she will suffer the consequences. Around 2:30 p.m., Hilaries asked for permission to go skateboarding with friends and left, hugging his mother goodbye, unaware it would be their last goodbye. When he returned later that evening, he found only Juliana at home. She seemed nervous, and Hilaries noticed she was drinking a large glass of soda. Despite her recent focus on healthy eating, Hilaries changed his clothes and left again, thinking that his mother, Maria, might be out shopping. When he returned around 11 o'clock p.m., he found the front door locked. This struck him as odd. After knocking for over 5 minutes, Juliana finally let him in, wrapped in a towel as if she had just showered. When Hilaries asked her what was going on, she ignored him and left the room. Hilaries went into the kitchen to look for his mother but couldn't find her. After searching the rooms and calling his mother but no one answered, he went to the guest bathroom and found the door locked. The light was off, and knocking received no answer. Concerned, he looked through a small viewing window and was horrified to see what appeared to be a body on the floor. Panicking, he called for Juliana and asked who was inside the bathroom. She feigned surprise and claimed not to know who was there. Unable to open the door himself, Hilaries called a neighbor and the police. Together, they forced the door open to find Maria lying face down in a pool of blood, with broken glasses and a knife handle nearby. The scene resembled a brutal murder. Maria bled to death without any assistance. Despite the distressing circumstances, Juliana remained composed and said nothing. Hilaries realized that she was the last person who saw their mother alive. During questioning, Juliana calmly recounted that after returning home from a walk, she and her mother argued again. Overwhelmed, Maria grabbed a knife and pointed it at Juliana's own neck. In response, Juliana picked up another kitchen knife, leading to a struggle during which her mother was killed. A forensic examination revealed that Maria had suffered 65 stab wounds, mostly shallow, with the fatal injury to her neck severing an artery. She bled to death within minutes, and no one attempted to help her. Juliana claimed the injury was self-inflicted during the fight, calling it an accident, but her story raised suspicions from the start. Maria had numerous injuries to her arms, shoulders, chest, back, and head, with her face requiring 300 stitches before burial. In contrast, Juliana only had minor scratches and a few bruises, casting doubt on her claim of self-defense and suggesting that she might have been the aggressor. The next day, when police re-interviewed Juliana, she changed her statement, admitting to striking first, but still framing it as self-defense. The conflict began when Maria returned home to find Juliana playing loud music while trying on new clothes. An argument ensued in which Maria yelled at Juliana, even throwing a vase at her. Juliana responded by shouting back, and during the altercation, Maria accused her daughter of trying to poison her. Juliana explained that she had discovered some packages in the kitchen, mistakenly believing they contained harmless substances, not rat poison. When Hilaries returned home, he found Juliana mixing soda with the poison. She claimed it was just an experiment. After Hilaries left, she realized the mixture did not react and disposed of it. However, Maria, seeing the white powder bags, accused Juliana of planning to kill her, escalating the argument further. In anger, Juliana went to the kitchen for a watermelon and grabbed a knife. As Maria continued to scream at her, Juliana stabbed the knife into the table and demanded her mother be quiet. But the insults persisted. Juliana swung the knife to scare her mother, who then grabbed another knife, unwilling to back down. They struggled, and in the chaos, they collided with the wall, accidentally turning off the lights. While loud music continued to play, masking their commotion from neighbors. When the fight ended and Juliana regained her composure, she turned on the light and found her mother lying on the floor, severely injured with a knife in her neck. Juliana insisted it was not her fault, claiming her mother inflicted the fatal wound on herself. Instead of calling the police, she dragged her mother's body to the guest bathroom and cleaned the kitchen. Following Juliana's confession, authorities decided to conduct psychiatric evaluations for both her and Maria, suspecting that Maria might have provoked the incident or caused her own death. This decision had a significant impact. Journalists wrote sensational articles claiming that Maria had gone insane and attacked her daughter, Juliana. This infuriated Hilares, who argued desperately that his mother had never suffered from mental illness. He attempted to refute Juliana's claim that their mother had inflicted the fatal wound on herself, but he didn't believe her. Meanwhile, Juliana eagerly embraced media speculation, insisting in interviews that their mother was unwell and accusing her younger brother of having been troubled for years because of it. Hilares accused Juliana of lying and trying to shift blame onto their deceased mother, who could no longer defend herself. In interviews, Hilares maintained that Juliana was the one who initiated conflict and attacked their mother. The forensic expert's report only intensified the situation, stating he could not determine with certainty who had delivered the lethal stab to the neck. This has led Juliana to adjust her testimony, stating that their mother chose to harm herself. Hilares confronted Juliana, pointing out that their mother had been stabbed 65 times, which he argued could not be considered an act of self-defense or self-harm. He had seen her mutilated body firsthand. It looked as though it had been ravaged by wild animals. The fact that Juliana did not try to help their mother or call the police after her death, but instead dragged her body into the bathroom and waited for Hilares to arrive, raised suspicions about the nature of the incident. Hilares was further enraged by the support Juliana received from a large portion of the family, particularly on their father's side. He was disheartened that his relatives united to support Juliana instead of seeking justice for their mother. She received strong support from her father and even her youngest brother, both of whom believed she had acted in self-defense. Hilares claimed his father had a history of excusing Juliana's behavior. Surprisingly, Juliana's actions garnered increasing support, including from neighbors who claimed that Maria often behaved erratically around her daughter. After psychiatric evaluations, experts concluded that Juliana was sane and aware of her actions, making her fit for trial. However, some concerning traits were also identified. Juliana displayed an unhealthy attachment to her father, Luis, known as the Electra complex, which led to rivalry with her mother. Further assessments revealed that she had a hysterical personality, prone to exaggerating emotions and seeking excessive attention through her behavior and appearance. The incident has sparked a lot of controversy and speculation on social media about the true relationship between Juliana and her father, Luis. Some have even suggested that the two were romantically involved. During a search of the family home, investigators found a knife handle but no blade. The blade was never discovered, and it remains unclear what Juliana did with it. An intact knife was found lodged in Maria's neck, yet no fingerprints were found on it. Evidence suggested that Juliana tried to conceal what she had done by hiding the knife handle, stabbing Maria multiple times, and possessing rat poison. Despite this, she continued to claim self-defense, which seemed unconvincing. Juliana's trial began on March 8, 2006. She asserted that her intent was self-defense and that she never planned to kill her mother. As the trial progressed, her story became increasingly inconsistent, especially regarding the rat poison. Initially, she claimed to have only been experimenting with the substance she found in the kitchen, but later denied any involvement with the poison at all, contradicting the discovery of several packets in her room. Juliana's lawyer argued that her actions were a result of years of emotional stress stemming from the troubled relationship with her mother, Maria. Juliana claimed she had endured constant insults and impulsive behavior from her mother. She recounted several distressing incidents, such as her mother throwing a container of beans at her, hitting her with a broom, and reading her diary without permission. all of which made her feel violated. During the hearing, she became very emotional and cried. While the defense team attempted to minimize the seriousness of the situation, an important testimony during the trial came from the forensic expert who performed Maria's autopsy. He noted that out of the 60 stab wounds, only the one to the neck was fatal, while others caused significant bleeding but were not life-threatening. The report suggested that Juliana might have delivered superficial, defensive blows while trying to protect herself. It was also highlighted that Maria's face required 300 stitches for burial. However, this detail was not emphasized during the trial. A defense expert testified convincingly that Juliana had no intent to kill. The incident was a spontaneous act born from a struggle for survival, where both were acting largely on instinct, unable to think rationally. On the other hand, the prosecution argued that the evidence and the nature of the injuries did not align with self-defense, presenting a case for a brutal murder. Ultimately, on July 26, 2006, Juliana Yamoja was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison, along with an approximately $8,000 fine. She disagreed with the verdict and appealed. In May 2007, her sentence was reduced to 12 years, attributed to her expressed remorse and her young age. Many followers of the case in the media questioned whether her father, Luis Yamoja Flores, a respected judge, had any influence on the lenient sentence. These suspicions intensified when Juliana was released on parole in May 2009, just 4 years into her sentence. The public reacted with outrage, and her family faced backlash. But she remained unfazed by the criticism. She assured journalists that she would adhere to all conditions set by the judge, which included notifying the court of any changes in her address, a prohibition on leaving the country, and regular updates on her activities. Complying with these conditions was not difficult for her. She quickly found a job with her uncle's company. In 2010, Juliana published a poetry collection and started a related blog. Many noted that she showed no remorse for her mother's death. Following her release, she appeared on various media programs, giving interviews without expressing grief, much to the irritation of those who viewed her as a criminal, including her younger brother, Hilaris. Despite portraying herself as a victim on television, Juliana began violating her parole rules. In late 2011, Hilaris reported that she had left the country after she discovered travel photos on her social media. He mentioned in interviews that he was not pursuing her, but believed she was responsible for their mother's murder and wanted to ensure she faced consequences. At this point, Hilaris had distanced himself from his family and faced backlash for reporting Juliana. He expressed in an interview that he couldn't pretend nothing had happened and felt isolated because he was the only one still mourning their mother and seeking justice for her. After contacting law enforcement, an investigation revealed that Juliana had committed several violations of her early release conditions. She missed mandatory therapy sessions, ignored curfews, failed to work for her uncle's company, and forged her lawyer's signatures to travel to Ecuador. Juliana tried to defend herself, claiming the signatures were not hers. Due to her continued violations, law enforcement took notice again. An arrest warrant was issued in January 2012, and due to her cumulative violations, she faced at least 8 more years in prison. When police attempted to arrest her, she was missing, leading to speculation that she had escaped. Weeks went by with no sign of her. During this time, her lawyer filed an appeal, arguing that the claims of multiple violations were unfounded and that the arrest was unlawful. Juliana's arrest warrant was dropped in March 2012, and soon after, she returned home as though nothing had happened. Her younger brother, Hilaris, was very upset by this outcome. He was aware that the judge who lifted the arrest warrant was a close friend of their father. At this time, Juliana only maintained a good relationship with her youngest brother. She completed the remainder of her sentence in freedom. Hilaris earned a degree in communications, speaks 3 languages, and has traveled to over 80 countries as a public relations specialist for government agencies. While he has partially reconnected with his family, their dynamics have changed permanently. he still regards his sister, Juliana, as a murderer. Juliana Yamoja obtained a law degree, but was unable to practice as a lawyer. Her legal journey ended in Europe. Around 2 a.m., in Ipacaraí, the silence of the night was shattered. Some neighbors, still awake, heard it. A young woman crying, screaming, begging for her life. Then suddenly, nothing. Silence. Doors stayed locked. Lights stayed off. No one stepped outside. No one called the police. Fear swallowed the entire street. What happened that night? And why did it take more than a year before the truth finally came to light? This isn't just a mystery. It's the story of a girl who asked for help and never received it. This is the case of Maliza Fleitas. Stay with us until the very end, because this story is not only about what happened to Maliza, it's about the silence of an entire neighborhood, the failure of a justice system, and a fugitive who turned her desperate cries into nothing more than an echo in the darkness. Maliza Fleitas was born on June 9, 1999, in Paraguay. She grew up with limited means. After her parents divorced, she lived with her father, Luis Henrique Fleitas, a street vendor and window cleaner, in a modest neighborhood. Despite difficult économique conditions, she still grew up in love and has many special memories with her father. From a young age, she adored animals. In her free time, she and her father attended rock and heavy metal concerts, and that music became central to her identity. Over time, her style reflected the scene she loved, a darker aesthetic, multiple tattoos and piercings, and a growing independence visible on her social media. She eventually worked at a tattoo and piercing studio. Friends describe her as outgoing and energetic, charming and charismatic. However, everything changed in April 2017 when Maliza, then 17, started dating Jaime Vera Fernandez, 32. Many said Jaime knew her father, was part of the same group of friends, often went to concerts and attended parties at home. Jaime was born in Paraguay in 1985. He moved to the United States in the 1992nd with his parents and 2 siblings. His family was well regarded. Neighbors even gathered to say goodbye when they left. But his life abroad was troubled. As a teenager, he struggled with behavior issues and substance abuse, and was often seen intoxicated. He also developed a fascination with the occult and darker music themes, especially metal. At 22, Jaime became the father of a daughter, Sofia. Although his relationship with Sofia's mother ended, he stayed in contact for his daughter's sake. In 2007, Jaime got into serious legal trouble in the United States, according to various reports. One version claims he assaulted someone in the New York City subway, leaving the victim critically injured. Another says he was involved in a gang-related fight and fled to avoid prosecution or retaliation. Whatever the case, he returned to Paraguay and kept a low profile. Jaime rarely left home except for concerts or essentials. Neighbors often saw him on Sundays eating lunch alone at his grandfather's grave. An unsettling ritual. His appearance drew attention. Long, straight hair, mostly black leather clothing, extensive tattoos, and long sleeves, even in Paraguay's intense heat. He always wore a pentagram necklace. He also owned many weapons, knives, swords, and firearms. Combined with his isolation, these details made neighbors uneasy. Jaime lived on the upper floor of his family's 2-story house. The ground floor was rented out, giving him rental income. He also received dollar remittances from relatives in the US, so he didn't need a formal job. At 30, he began dating a woman slightly older than him. Life felt steadier then. He enrolled in culinary school, pursued his passion for cooking. and moved in with her and her children. But the calm didn't last. The relationship fell apart, and by early 2017 they had separated for good. After the breakup, things worsened. Jaime reportedly fired guns from his home's windows, alarming neighbors. Though no police investigation followed, he became more socially active, hosting more visitors, and rumors spread that he was using multiple banned substances. During this chaotic period, he and Melisa began appearing together in public, at concerts and local events, clearly as a couple. Their relationship quickly drew concern. The 15-year age gap made many uneasy, but Jaime's erratic behavior was the bigger issue. Melisa's father, Luis, strongly disapproved, both because of Jaime's age and his disturbing conduct. Despite this, Melisa moved in with Jaime. From then on, little was known about her daily life. Neighbors saw her rarely leave the house. She often slept until afternoon and appeared to have dropped out of high school. The cheerful, lively young woman her friends knew seemed to be fading behind closed doors. Over the following months, friends noticed emotional and physical changes. Melisa gained weight, altered her hair color and style, and became more withdrawn. Jaime's behavior grew more troubling. He taught Melisa to use a firearm, something that might have seemed thrilling at first but soon felt like a warning about the danger around her. At one gathering at their home, friends came to listen to music. The evening soured when Jaime, consumed by jealousy, publicly berated Melisa. The argument escalated, and she stormed out that night. That moment marked a turning point. Her friends were worried when they couldn't reach her, but she appeared the next day acting as if nothing had happened. Still, concerns mounted. At another event, Melisa, Jaime, and Luis attended a rock concert together. The night turned tense when Jaime, reportedly drunk, confronted Melisa in a jealous rage. The situation escalated until police intervened. Friends felt unsettled, and they had noticed other red flags. Signs Melisa refused to discuss. Bruises and marks appeared on her face and body. When asked, she stayed silent. Her friends respected her privacy, but feared the worst. Then came the night of July 20, 2017. Melisa and her friends went to a music event at a local hostel. At first, it looked like a normal night, but her friends soon noticed her unease. She was anxious, guarded, and spoke carefully, as if worried about being overheard. In a brief moment when Jaime wasn't watching, she confided in them. She said she had learned disturbing things about him that made her feel unsafe. He was violent and unpredictable, had cut his own arms, and kept a large cache of weapons in his home. Alarmed, her friends urged her to leave and promised to help. That night, Melisa decided to end the relationship. She left the event with Jaime, saying she needed to speak with him privately and make her intentions clear. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next day, her friends tried to contact her. She never responded. At first, Melisa's friends thought she had simply changed her mind and decided to stay with Jaime. But by the fourth day, worry turned into fear. Jaime was spotted at another concert at the same hostel, this time without Melisa. Melisa's friends began to panic. A few days later, they saw him alone again at a local bar. Something felt wrong. One of Melisa's friends called him. When asked about Melisa, Jaime calmly said everything was fine and that they were at home together. But as more days passed without any sign of her, his answer felt less believable. Her friends began searching on their own. They went to Jaime's parents' house, hoping to find Melisa or get information, but no one was there. Desperate, they tried to file a missing person report. Police refused to take it because they weren't family members. Even so, the friends didn't give up. Convinced something terrible had happened, and suspecting Jaime, they turned to social media to spread the word. Eventually, they reached Melisa's father, Luis, who lived in another city, and told him everything. By then, 2 weeks had already passed without any contact from her. On August 10, 2017, exactly 15 days after Meliza was last seen, her father officially reported her missing, but Jaime had also vanished. A local prosecutor took the case, yet the investigation was mishandled from the start. The assigned official showed little interest. Authorities conducted a sloppy search of Jaime's house. His belongings were still there, untouched. No useful leads surfaced. Neighbors weren't interviewed. Evidence wasn't collected or preserved. By any standard, the search was negligent. With no real investigative effort, the case was quietly set aside. Officials claimed Meliza had probably left willingly with Jaime. Her friends and family knew that wasn't true. As months went by, feminist organizations in Paraguay rallied around the case, holding protests and campaigns demanding answers. The justice system's silence became impossible to ignore. As the first anniversary approached, there was still no progress. Meliza's friends and family became the driving force behind the search. They even began to consider that she might have been trafficked. Public pressure finally drew media attention. On July 24, 2018, a prominent journalist aired a major investigation. The report exposed the authorities' inaction and brought forward new witness testimonies from neighbors who had stayed silent. Multiple people said that around 2 a.m. on July 21, 2017, the night Meliza disappeared, desperate screams came from Jaime's house. She was begging for her life. But instead of calling the police, neighbors locked their doors. Too afraid to intervene, Jaime had a reputation for violent outbursts. He had fired guns from his window more than once, and no one wanted to become his next target. One neighbor later said they saw Jaime days afterward, walking around as if nothing had happened. One especially chilling account came from a tenant of Jaime's, a woman who sold plastic goods. The night of the screams, Jaime called her unexpectedly. He said he was leaving for Argentina due to health issues and told her to pay rent to his uncle. Almost as an afterthought, he added that if Meliza's father came looking for him, she should say he had already left. This detail remained hidden for nearly a year until the journalist revealed it. Public outrage and media pressure finally forced action. Authorities ordered a new, more thorough search of Jaime's house. They found firearms and money transfer receipts from the United States. But beyond that, nothing meaningful happened. The investigation stalled yet again, and no solid leads followed. 3 months later, something unexpected happened. Something that would break the case open. On October 13, 2018, construction workers doing routine jobs at a neighbor's home noticed disturbed soil in Jaime's backyard. It looked like someone had dug a large rectangular pit and covered it. At first, they weren't sure it meant anything. But when they dug a bit deeper, they found something alarming. Dozens of bullets buried more than 40 centimeters underground. They reported it to their foreman, and word spread quickly. Neighbors started connecting the dots. Meliza's disappearance, Jaime's suspicious behavior, and now this discovery. Concerned neighbors called the police, but authorities dismissed the tip and refused to respond. A close friend of Meliza's, active in a local feminist collective, tried again. This time, the police said that no forensic team would be available until Monday, October 15. Outraged, the collective went to the media. The pressure worked. 3 days later, after protests by feminist groups in Paraguay, national police finally searched the property. What they found went far beyond bullets. In the same area of the yard, they uncovered a decomposed female body. Nearby were clothing items, a black leather jacket and a pair of boots. The skull showed visible trauma, especially to the jaw, initially thought to be from blunt force. The prosecutor revealed something disturbing. During a previous search, officers had passed over this exact spot and found nothing. This raised serious questions. Had the body been there all along? Or was it moved later? While dental records would take time to confirm, Meliza's father and friends immediately recognized the clothing. The jacket had been a gift, and one of her favorites. There was no doubt. Maliza's body was taken to the judicial morgue. Investigators returned to Hamy's home for a fourth search. Inside, the press described the scene as an apartment of horror. Every room contained disturbing images and black metal references. Mythological figures and violent imagery covered the walls. Luminol tests in the main bedroom lit up with blood traces on the walls, sheets, and pillows. It was no longer just suspicion. The room had been a murder scene. A theory emerged. Maliza may have been lying face up on the bed when she was killed. Her body, wrapped in a comforter, might have been dragged through the kitchen and thrown from the balcony into the yard where she was found. More clues supported this. A bullet hole was found in the mattress. A shell casing was embedded deep in the wooden bed frame. The angle and trajectory matched an entry wound at Maliza's temple and an exit through her chin. The autopsy confirmed a close-range gunshot to the head. There was no gunpowder on her skin, indicating the gun was fired near Comus, but not pressed against her head. Despite the fatal shot, the mattress had little blood. The pillows, however, were soaked, suggesting that Jaime may have fired through them to muffle the sound. Investigators also saw unusual marks on the bedroom walls, as if something large had been attached or recently removed. Whatever it was might have played a role in the crime. Meanwhile, Maliza's friends and feminist groups came together to raise money for her funeral. They sold food in the streets, stood in the cold for hours, and even endured robberies during their efforts. Initially, Maliza was buried without a headstone. Later, her loved ones placed a memorial plaque. Her friends, along with women's groups, publicly denounced the prosecutor's failures. Her father, Luis, expressed his anger. The police hadn't found his daughter. He had. She was discovered only because of a coincidence, a construction project, and a shallow grave. After this, the prosecutors on the case were formally disciplined, and the investigation was reassigned. The case stopped being treated as a disappearance and was officially classified as a femicide. An international arrest warrant was issued for Jaime Vera Fernandez, but he had already vanished. Authorities believe he fled the country soon after Maliza's death. He has family in the United States, Brazil, France, and possibly Argentina, making him harder to track. Records indicate that after leaving Paraguay, he passed through Punta del Este and then traveled to São Paulo, Brazil, where he flew to Colombia. The last activity linked to him was a cash withdrawal in Mexico. Investigators suspect he may be living under a different identity in the United States. A neighbor reported seeing two men, one of them Jaime, dragging Maliza on the night she died. The backyard where she was buried was visible from the street, making it unlikely anyone could dig a grave unnoticed without help. Multiple witnesses said people visited Jaime that weekend. Despite this, no DNA tests were conducted at the scene, and no effort was made to determine whether someone else had been in the apartment or helped cover up the crime. To this day, he remains a fugitive. As of August 2025, Maliza's friends and family continue their fight. They speak to the media, organize public campaigns, and demand justice. They urge anyone who has seen Jaime or knows his whereabouts to come forward. It is likely he left Paraguay by land, crossing into Brazil on August 11, 2017, before continuing to Colombia. After that, the trail went cold. He could be anywhere. The search continues,